Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Karen Leylen Oviedo. Rolando Angel Aquino was born in 1987 in Bolivia and later moved to Guaymalan, Argentina. He is the oldest of 7 siblings and started working at the age of 14 to support his parents. In his youth, Rolando met Carolina Chavez, and in 2007, they had a son together. They eventually separated. Later, he entered a relationship with Maria Soledad Guardia, with whom he had another son, Elias. Despite their breakup, Rolando remained involved in his children's lives. Elias cherished his father and enjoyed spending time with him, even after his parents parted ways. Meanwhile, Rolando maintained relationships with his ex-wives and always prioritized his sons, ensuring that he remained in contact despite not living with them. Eventually, Rolando started a relationship with Karen Leylen Oviedo. Karen is an outgoing and friendly woman, born on March 30, 1990. In 2016, they moved in together and started their own business. Besides running a business with Karen, Rolando also worked at a market that specialized in wholesale fruit sales. To the neighbors, Rolando and Karen appeared loving and happy. However, it was clear that Karen was the dominant figure in their relationship. Someone once shared that Rolando had caught her in a car with her lover and reacted violently, almost destroying the vehicle. Despite this incident, things eventually calmed down, and he forgave her. Based on their social media photos, the two seemed to share genuine affection and enjoyed being together. Before meeting Rolando, Karen already had 2 daughters. One of the fathers of her daughters is Raul Ojeda, whom she married in 2013. After a while, Raul left his family. He was originally the owner of a successful shoe store, earning a good income, while Karen worked at a clothing boutique. Over time, the family encountered financial difficulties, which made the atmosphere unbearable. Feeling threatened, he made the decision to leave. Pretending he needed to buy something, he secretly fled the city, traveled to another country, and intentionally changed buses multiple times until arriving in Paraguay. He made sure his movements were untraceable to the residents of Noto. Elias, the youngest son of Ronaldo and his ex-wife, frequently visits his father. They made it a point to spend the 2019 holidays together, which Elias greatly enjoyed. However, according to Karen, Elias was somewhat distant in his interactions with her and her family. In the summer of 2019, Elias went to see Rolando and Karen again. At that time, the boy, who was 9 years old, was excited to turn all the plans he had discussed with his father into reality. On the morning of July 12, 2019, before heading to work, Rolando checked on Elias in his room to wish him good morning. He immediately noticed the boy was unwell and decided to take him to a children's hospital. After doctors examined Elias, it became clear that his condition was critical and required urgent care in the intensive care unit. Despite the doctor's efforts, young Elias passed away after hours in a coma. Relatives revealed that Elias had left home without showing any unusual symptoms and arrived at his father's house appearing healthy. However, the medical report stated that he succumbed to third-degree poisoning, which led to multiple organ failure and cerebral thrombosis. Since his medical records showed he was a healthy boy, doctors requested an additional forensic examination. Nevertheless, Elias's mother and grandmother refused the procedure, considering it too harsh for the deceased. Karen suggested cremation but then decided against it. She chose to bury Elias in a private cemetery, where she could visit and leave flowers. Rolando, devastated by his son's death, gradually healed as time went by. 16 months after the tragedy, he proposed to Karen, and the two married. Unfortunately, their happiness was short-lived. On February 7, 2022, 35-year-old Rolando suddenly fell ill. He experienced severe vomiting before losing consciousness in his living room. Emergency services were called immediately. Karen opened the door to let the medical team in, and they found Rolando still lying on the floor. After regaining consciousness, Rolando was transported to the Santa Maria clinic via ambulance, although another account suggests Karen herself drove him to the hospital. Despite the doctor's best efforts to save Rolando, He did not survive and passed away on February 9th. The cause of death was determined to be severe poisoning. His sudden and unexpected death brought up many questions. Given that Rolando was healthy and regularly participated in sports, the medical staff interviewed his wife to gather more information. When asked if Rolando was taking any medications, Karen replied that he was. She said that her husband had been taking a medication to lighten dark spots on his skin. However, this information causes experts to be skeptical. Test results showed abnormally high levels of oxalate and calcium crystals in Rolando's body, which are classic signs of ethylene glycol poisoning, a key ingredient commonly found in car antifreeze. Given the unusual circumstances of Rolando's death and concerns raised by his family, authorities stepped in to investigate further. They ordered various forensic tests and interrogated Karen, who provided conflicting statements during questioning. As a result, she was detained for the investigation, and her phone was confiscated. Rolando's death deeply affected those close to him, including his friends and teammates. The news also shocked others in the community, including visitors to the warehouse, Raul, and local residents. People found it difficult to understand how a seemingly healthy man could pass away so suddenly and unexpectedly. Raul, Karen's ex-husband, was shocked when rumors began circulating about deliberate poisoning. He described Karen as affectionate and nonviolent during their marriage. Investigators questioned Karen about the substance she gave Rolando, and she claimed it was a remedy for skin spots, administered with a dropper. When asked to provide the bottle, Karen stated that their housekeeper had already discarded it. However, the housekeeper, Claudia Cortez, contradicted Karen, asserting she hadn't disposed of the bottle. Claudia also mentioned overhearing a conversation where Rolando told Karen he disliked what she was giving him. The prosecutor's office initiated an investigation to gather information in Karen's household neighborhood. Neighbors reported seeing Karen repeatedly administering medications to her husband. Doubts were raised about the circumstances surrounding Rolando, prompting investigators to consider that Karen may have intended only to temporarily sedate her husband, rather than harm him. However, the Department for Technological Crimes dismissed this theory based on their findings. After examining Karen's phone, investigators discovered that she had searched for queries such as "what is the deadliest poison?" and "how to delete search history." Furthermore, evidence revealed that she had ordered ethylene glycol from an online store twice in the days leading up to her husband's death. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's Agency for Toxic Substances, ethylene glycol is a synthetic liquid that absorbs water and is commonly used in the production of antifreeze. It is odorless, has a sweet taste, and is highly toxic to humans. Based on preliminary findings from the forensic examination conducted by the Supreme Court, investigators charged Karen with intentionally poisoning Rolando by diluting a toxic substance with orange juice. Consuming the drink caused Rolando to suffer severe poisoning over the weekend of February 5th and 6th, leading to a rapid decline in his health. He was admitted to the emergency room on Monday and subsequently passed away. By mid-February, authorities compiled sufficient evidence against Karen, and on February 16th, she was formally charged with aggravated murder. Rolando's death and the subsequent investigation raised suspicions about the circumstances surrounding the death of 9-year-old Elias. Authorities launched a new inquiry into Karen's potential involvement in the boy's death. Upon reviewing Elias's medical history, the prosecutor's office noted that Karen claimed he was healthy and energetic, but during a stay at his father's home, the child suddenly fell into a coma from which he never recovered. The death certificate stated that Elias died due to internal organ failure and brain thrombosis. However, investigators questioned whether such causes were plausible for a healthy child of his age. The prosecutor's office uncovered evidence linking Karen to the purchase of ethylene glycol. Store records confirmed that she purchased the substance on July 2, 2019, shortly before Elias moved into her household. Furthermore, Elias's relatives revealed that Karen had strongly advocated for cremating the boy's remains, despite his biological mother opposing the idea and choosing burial instead. Based on the accumulated evidence, prosecutor Claudia Rios charged Karen with aggravated murder on March 4, alleging that she had poisoned Elias. On March 14, the court approved a pretrial detention order for Karen. Although she appealed the decision, the judge upheld the ruling, requiring her to remain in custody until the trial. The trial commenced on Monday, November 28, 2022, at the criminal court in Mendoza, nearly 10 months after the alleged incident. The case focused on Karen and two separate charges: the murder of Elias and the murder of Rolando. Prosecutor Gustavo Fellman handled the first charge, while prosecutor Claudia Rios managed the second. Javier Aquino, Rolando's eldest son and 15 years old at the time, acted as the plaintiff, supported by legal representation. In their opening statements, the prosecution argued that Karen had murdered Elias and later Rolando by giving them orange juice mixed with ethylene glycol. This toxic substance caused severe poisoning, ultimately leading to multiple organ failure. Karen's defense, however, challenged the prosecution's allegations, contending that there was no direct evidence linking her to the crimes. The defense attorney also highlighted that Karen lacked a clear motive for the murders, as she had already secured ownership of the house, 2 cars, and the family business. Additionally, they refuted the prosecution's assertion that Karen had used her phone to make suspicious purchases or research ethylene glycol online, undermining allegations that she had previously used the poison to harm Elias. While condemning the actions that led to the deaths as deplorable, the defense reminded the court that no conviction should occur unless guilt is conclusively proven. Karen, labeled by the media as the poisoner, took the stand after the initial testimonies concluded. Following a request from her lawyer, the judge permitted her to speak. Karen firmly declared her innocence, stating that she had been falsely accused of committing a heinous crime. She expressed her distress at the idea that someone was trying to frame her as the murderer. Her lawyer emphasized to the jury that the accusations against her were baseless. Karen claimed that Rolando may have hacked into her account to purchase antifreeze. According to her testimony, when the package containing antifreeze arrived, Rolando told her not to touch it, left the house, and took the parcel with him. Karen also stated that she had a verifiable alibi. On February 6th, the day Rolando began to feel unwell, she claimed that she wasn't at home. Instead, she had gone to a beauty salon and then to the gym, returning later to find her husband already vomiting. During her statement, Karen criticized the prosecutors, accusing them of immorality for implicating her, a mother of 2 young daughters, in the murder of a child, Elias. The prosecution then requested permission to cross-examine Karen. They asked if she had suggested cremating Elias. She denied this, asserting that it was not her decision and that she had never said anything of the sort. During the trial, prosecutors introduced various witnesses, including family members of Elias. Maria, Elias's mother, testified that after her son's death, Rolando told her about Karen suggesting cremating the boy's body so that each family could keep the ashes for 1 week. However, Maria rejected this suggestion. She also told the jury that during a meeting at the cemetery, Rolando mentioned Karen's jealousy, claiming she even slept in a separate bed because of it. Carolina, who is Rolando's first wife, also testified. She confirmed that, according to Rolando, he and Karen slept in separate beds. Carolina mentioned that she had never met or spoken to Karen before. However, on the morning of February 8th, Karen called her directly to report that Rolando was ill and had been hospitalized. During the conversation, Karen mentioned that Rolando might have taken some medication that caused him to feel unwell. She also asked Carolina for help unlocking Rolando's phone, saying she suspected he might be involved with another woman. Carolina was shocked to hear about Rolando's condition, as he had appeared perfectly fine just days earlier when they met. She explained that when they arrived at the clinic, Karen went ahead to speak with the doctors, while she was asked to wait outside because she was not allowed to enter. Carolina found the situation very strange. Determined to get answers, she contacted the doctor directly and demanded to know why she hadn't been allowed to see her ex-husband. The doctor explained that Rolando had lost consciousness, had not regained it, and was unresponsive to all treatments. Carolina then went to the secretary's office to file a formal complaint. During another conversation with Karen, Carolina learned that Rolando had taken syrup for a skin condition, which had caused an allergic reaction. Karen added that the bottle was no longer in the house, as the housekeeper had thrown it away. Karen also stated that she was covering all the medical expenses and told Carolina that there was no reason for her to stay any longer. Furthermore, Karen tried to convince Carolina that Rolando had expressed a wish to be cremated, suggesting that his ex-wife should support this decision. The jury also heard testimony from doctors, police officers, and expert witnesses during the trial. Among them was pediatrician Ivana Marinelli, who treated Elias during his hospitalization in July 2019. Dr. Marinelli explained that the boy had been brought to the hospital struggling to breathe and required emergency intubation. A CT scan revealed severe cerebral thrombosis, and intensive therapy was initiated. She confirmed that Elias's symptoms, such as altered consciousness, anxiety that escalated into a coma, were consistent with ethylene glycol poisoning. After treatment, Elias's condition worsened rapidly. At approximately 5 p.m. on July 12, he suffered cardiac and respiratory arrest. The medical team attempted resuscitation for 50 minutes, with the boy's father present, but all efforts proved unsuccessful. At 6 p.m., the boy was pronounced dead. During the trial, the prosecutors presented the jury with a psychological report about Karen, based on Dr. Hayes' observations. Defense attorney Luis Torres argued that Karen had lied and concealed the truth. She painted Karen as someone who attempted to appear virtuous but was, in reality, unemotional, cruel, and uncooperative. The debate persisted while prosecutor Gustavo Fellman shared further details. Gustavo read from Karen's psychiatric report, highlighting the doctor's assessment of her relationships as being self-serving and primarily aimed at personal gain. The report also noted that Karen underwent a psychological evaluation shortly after the death of her husband, Rolando. However, she showed no signs of distress or emotional trauma over the loss. Describing Karen's personality, Gustavo stated that she was highly self-centered, concealed her negative attitudes toward others, exhibited overly controlled hostility, and harbored suppressed impulsive behaviors. There was no evidence to support Karen's claim of being a victim of gender-based violence. Before the guilty verdict was delivered, the prosecutor firmly argued to the jury that all evidence pointed to Karen having meticulously planned and carried out both murders without raising suspicion. She knowingly purchased ethylene glycol, disposed of its packaging, and disguised it as juice. After Elias and Rolando fell ill, she made no effort to help them. Instead, she attempted to destroy evidence and portrayed herself as a victim. The prosecutor submitted a list of ethylene glycol purchases made using Karen's account in connection with Rolando's murder. The prosecutors and the plaintiff urged the jury to deliver a unanimous guilty verdict, emphasizing that it was the only path to justice. They argued for Karen to be convicted of murder with aggravating circumstances. However, the defense argued that the prosecutor's office lacked solid evidence linking Karen to the deaths of Elias and Rolando. The defense attorney contended that while a person can appear virtuous and still commit a crime, it is equally possible for someone to have flaws and yet be innocent of any wrongdoing. The defense acknowledged that they could not present evidence that fully absolved Karen. Consequently, on December 1, 2022, the 12 members of the jury found Karen Leylen Oviedo guilty of murder in the death of Elias. She was also convicted of Rolando's death under aggravating circumstances, having used a treacherous method. Karen, dressed in black and wearing a white rosary around her neck, showed no emotion as the verdict was read. She was sentenced to life imprisonment. Following the verdict, the defense attorney questioned the jury's ability to make an impartial decision, arguing that they lacked legal expertise and a thorough understanding of the evidence. He also criticized the judicial process in Argentina, claiming it differs significantly from that in the United States and other developed countries with stronger legal safeguards. Despite these objections, Karen is now acknowledged as one of Argentina's most notorious criminals for poisoning Elias and Rolando. Although Karen was convicted, it does little to ease the sorrow of Rolando's and Elias's relatives. It remains unclear why Karen, a mother of two, took the lives of her loving and faithful husband and their son, who had his entire future ahead of him. Karen, the calculated poisoner, tried to evade justice. Had she succeeded in convincing authorities to cremate the bodies, she might have received a lighter sentence or even eventual release. The exact motive behind her actions has never been revealed. The families of Rolando and Elias still seek answers, but they may never find them, as Karen has never admitted guilt. Despite seemingly having a perfect life, a house, a car, financial stability, and an income higher than her husband's, she committed this shocking crime. She never took out life insurance on her husband, which makes her actions all the more perplexing. Now, she faces a life sentence behind bars. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Yingying Zhang. Yingying Zhang was a student from China who came to the USA after being invited by the University of Illinois. She and her fiancé from China were planning a wedding. Sadly, she never got the chance to wear her wedding dress, as she was killed just 6 weeks after her arrival in the USA. Born on December 21, 1990, Yingying was a Chinese ecology student who graduated from Beijing University with a master's degree in environmental engineering. Yingying is a smart and cheerful person. In April 2017, 26-year-old Yingying traveled to Champaign, Illinois in the USA, invited by the University of Illinois to study for a year in the plant-growing department of natural resources. She intended to pursue graduate studies afterward. In China, Yingying met her fiancé, Alenka. They were classmates and top students, having dated for several years. The couple planned to marry once she returned home. On June 9, 2017, Yingying was leaving school to meet a real estate agent to sign a lease. At 1:39 p.m., she texted the agent to confirm that she would arrive around 2:10 p.m. This was the last text she sent, and she never arrived. At 2:40 p.m., the real estate agent texted her to ask where she was, but received no response. The agent eventually left to meet another client. As hours went by and Yingying did not return, her friends became increasingly worried. She was supposed to return to campus after signing the contract, as she had no other plans for the day. Her friends repeatedly called and messaged her, but she did not reply. Even Alenka could not contact her. This situation was very alarming. In the evening, Yingying still had not returned. Too worried, Yingying's friends contacted the police and reported her missing. At first, the police thought she might be somewhere with her friends. However, after questioning all of her friends and finding no new information, along with no activity recorded on her bank cards or phone, they began a search. Her phone was turned off at 2:28 p.m. on the day she went missing and was never turned back on. The police searched the university campus, but no one saw Yingying. A $10,000 reward was offered for information about Yingying's location. After discovering she was missing, her parents and Alenka traveled to Illinois and raised the reward to $50,000 for any information that could lead to her return. Both her parents and Alenka joined the search efforts and committed to staying until they found she. The FBI joined the investigation. They tracked her phone, which had been detected at a bus stop close to the campus. Yingying did not have a car and relied on public transportation, particularly buses. CCTV footage showed Yingying boarding a bus at 1:35 p.m. She was supposed to transfer to another bus at 1:52 p.m. but missed it. Cameras then captured her walking to the next bus stop. While she was waiting, a black four-door Saturn Astra drove by, circled back, and stopped near her at around 2:03 p.m. After a brief conversation with the driver, Yingying got into the car and left. This was the last time she was seen on surveillance cameras. The driver was the last person known to have seen her, but the license plate number was not shown on the footage. The FBI needs to determine who was driving the car. They found 18 black four-door Saturn Astras registered in the area. One notable feature of the car, as seen in surveillance footage, was the cracked rims. After examining all 18 cars, they identified one that matched the description and also had the same sunroof. The car belonged to 28-year-old Brent Christensen. Brent grew up in Stevens Point, Wisconsin, and married his high school sweetheart Michelle Zortman in 2011. 2 years later, the couple moved to Champaign, Illinois, where he entered graduate school at the University of Illinois and worked as a teaching assistant. He left graduate school in 2016. Brent was considered a family man and had no criminal record. When FBI agents asked Brent about his whereabouts, he couldn't remember, mentioning he might have been sleeping at home or playing video games. His wife, Michelle, who he said he had an open relationship with, was away with another man. Brent allowed the agents to search his apartment and car. They discovered that a section of the car's interior, near the front passenger door, had been cleaned thoroughly while the rest of the car was still dirty. This was odd because cars are usually cleaned completely unless there is a specific reason for cleaning only part of it. A quick inspection of the apartment did not reveal any clues, so the agents took Brent to the police station for more questioning. At first, Brent denied knowing Enying or being involved in her situation. However, when shown surveillance footage, he admitted that he had been passing by and seen a girl who looked very upset. He said that he stopped to help her and she said she was late for a meeting, so he offered her a ride, which she accepted. He claimed that after suddenly taking a wrong turn a few blocks later, Enying became frightened and tried to open the locked front passenger door. He then stopped to let her out. After she escaped from the car, he never saw her again. When the police and Agent Igor asked him for a more detailed description of Enying, but he had difficulty distinguishing people of Asian descent. As a result, he became a suspect. There was only circumstantial evidence against him, not enough to make an arrest, so the police had to release Brent. However, they decided to follow him, monitor his activities, and gather more evidence of his possible involvement in Enying's disappearance. They realized that Brand was the person they needed to investigate. The FBI seized his phone, computer, camera, and other digital devices for analysis. They soon discovered that Brent was hiding important information. In March 2017, he visited a psychologist and revealed during his sessions that he was obsessed with thoughts of murder and fascinated by serial killers. He claimed that he had learned how to kill without leaving any evidence to avoid detection. Brent also confided in the psychologist that his life was falling apart. He had started drinking regularly and his wife Michelle, who was having an affair, had asked him for a divorce. Brent did not want to end the marriage. It was also revealed that Brent had met a woman named Gray Tora on a dating website. They began dating and met at his home. They agreed that Brent would take the dominant role in their relationship while Tora would be submissive. Brent even introduced Tora to his wife, who knew about their open relationship and that Tora was also seeing other men for intimate encounters. Police later discovered that his computer search history included terms like kidnapping, hygiene products, and how to track an iPhone. It appeared that he was searching for information on how to kidnap someone, disable phone tracking, clean up blood, and track a girl. However, this information was not enough to make an arrest. More evidence or a confession was needed from him. The FBI agent asked Tora, Brent's new girlfriend, to assist in the investigation, and she agreed to cooperate with the wiretap. On June 29, Brent attended a memorial event for the missing Enying girl, where her family desperately begged for her return. During the event, Brent drank, smiled, and even leaned in to sing softly to Dash. Afterwards, he used the Notes app on his phone to write, "It's me. She's number 13. She's gone forever," and he drew the number 13 on his hand. This made Tora shiver. Tora felt uncomfortable listening to Brent's story, but he continued, seemingly trying to impress her. Brent had no idea that she was cooperating with the FBI and recording everything he said. Meanwhile, a drunken Brent revealed the grisly details of Enying's final moments, smiling as he spoke. He took off Enying's clothes and began doing various things to her. She endured everything. He tried to strangle her for 10 minutes but then let her go. She was still breathing, and he was shocked to learn that she was still alive. She fought harder than anyone he had ever met. She was not the only person he had murdered. Now, there were 13 victims. Brent told Tora that he first committed this crime when he was 19 years old. He dragged a corpse into the bathroom of his apartment and hit her over the head with a baseball bat. He then stabbed her in the neck and decapitated her. In the recording, he compared himself to his idol, Ted Bundy, and bragged that he had more victims than Jeffrey Dahmer and John Gacy. He boasted that he had attracted national attention. These recordings became crucial evidence against him. Brent was arrested the next day. His apartment was thoroughly searched with luminol, revealing a bloody handprint on the wall next to Brent's bed and in the bathroom. There was also blood on the passenger door of his car. A large bloodstain was found on his mattress, and a cadaver dog detected the scent of human remains in the bathroom. DNA from Ying's toothbrush was found on a baseball bat, mattress, carpet, and in the bathroom. Brent's GPS data confirmed that he was present at the crime scene at the time of the incident. Additionally, receipts for trash bags and cleaning products were found in his home, along with a large gym bag, likely used to discreetly transport the remains. That morning at 7:45 a.m., he bought a large bottle of cheap rum from a liquor store. When he got home, he drank heavily. Then drove around looking for victims while intoxicated. After a few hours, he spotted a student from the university, Emily Hogan, walking to a bus stop near the campus. He approached her and identified himself as an undercover police officer and asked her to get into his car for questioning. She refused and ran away. She later identified him and posted a warning on Facebook to warn others about the fake police in the area, which happened after the disappearance. After Emily rejected him, Brent sought out another victim and met a girl. He pretended to be a police officer and offered her a ride in his car. She believed him because he had a police badge, had a police radio, and drove a police car, so she got in. Once in the car, he drove home, confiscated her phone, and turned it off. Brent then tied her hands, took her to his apartment, raped and murdered her, and then dismembered her body. He bought cleaning supplies and attempted to clean both the house and the car, but investigators later discovered traces of blood hidden under the carpet and behind the baseboards. Brent claims the idea was spontaneous and unplanned. However, his computer search history suggests otherwise, suggesting he was prepared for it. Brent is charged with kidnapping, murder, and making false statements to a federal agent, and faces the death penalty. His trial began in June 2019. His lawyer argued that Brent had a difficult childhood, with his mother being an alcoholic and him not socializing with his siblings and lacking friends. During that time, he often contemplated ending his life and struggled with mental health issues, sleep problems, and substance abuse, which led him to seek help. His lawyer noted that Brent was not in a good mental state and was plagued by dark thoughts, especially after his wife mentioned divorce. This led to a downward spiral for him. At that moment, Brent was in the courtroom, wiping away tears. The attorney admitted Brent was guilty but asked the jury to give him a lenient sentence. During the trial, Brent's wife, Michelle, reported seeing a large gym bag and noted that Brent left with it on June 12. She said that there was no foul odor and that he easily threw the bag over his shoulder, leading her to believe that it could not have contained a body. It must have contained something light. However, she also acknowledged that the bag was large enough to hold a person and acknowledged that her husband could lift the weight of a girl. Michelle noticed new cleaning products in the house and stains on the carpet. Brent explained that he had a nosebleed, which caused the stains. So he purchased a cleaning product to try to clean the carpet. Despite the large stain, Michelle didn't find this suspicious. Calls from prison were recorded. During one call, Michelle told Brent that Tora had set him up. In court, Brent Christensen confessed to everything but didn't disclose the location of the bodies. On July 18, 2019, after 2 hours of deliberation, the jury found Brent guilty on all charges, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Later, Michelle relocated to another state and changed her last name to begin a new life. After the trial, Tora sought psychological help due to the traumatic experiences she had from hearing Brent's actions. A suicide note was discovered in Brent's cell, suggesting that he may have been planning to end his life or seek attention. He was then placed in solitary confinement and closely monitored. Although Brent claimed to have a 13th victim, no evidence of the existence of additional victims was ever found. He denied these allegations in court. The FBI analyzed 19 unsolved missing persons cases in Illinois and Wisconsin and submitted Brent's DNA for comparison, but no matches were found. It appears that Brent was just bragging to Tora and made up the story. Inying's family was not satisfied with the verdict. They felt that the killer deserved the death penalty. After learning that their daughter had been brutally murdered, all the parents wanted was to give Inying a proper burial. They were heartbroken to discover that their daughter's body would likely never be found. In their grief, they begged Brent to reveal the location of their daughter's remains. He told his lawyer that he had dismembered her body, put the pieces in 3 separate trash bags, and thrown them into a dumpster at his apartment complex. He also claimed that her phone, textbooks, and backpack were thrown into another dumpster, which was likely taken to a landfill. Police discovered that the trash at his apartment had been emptied 3 days after she went missing, and the trash had been taken to a landfill. There, the trash had been compacted multiple times, mixed with other waste and scattered over a wide area, making it nearly impossible to find her remains. The only consolation for the family is that Brent will serve his sentence without parole, ensuring he cannot commit any more crimes. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Amy Widener. Amy Widener was born in 1973 into a large family. She has an older brother, John Paul, who is 1 year older than her, and 2 younger sisters, Tiny and Cassie, who are 1 and 4 years younger. Their mother, Gloria Widener, raised the children alone after divorcing her father, who was absent from their lives. The family lived in a house in Indianapolis. Amy often acted as her mother's maid, taking on responsibilities such as cooking, cleaning, and caring for her younger sisters. A diligent student, Amy aspired to become a teacher and was known for her bright, cheerful personality and charming smile. At the age of 14, Amy's life changed dramatically when she became pregnant. She was afraid to tell her mother and tried to hide her growing belly by wearing loose clothing. For more than 5 months, her family did not realize she was pregnant. However, as she approached her 6th month, keeping the secret became more difficult. Amy finally found the courage to tell her mother. She burst into tears and said, "Mommy, I don't want you to hate me." Her mother, Gloria, was shocked but held her daughter close, comforting her despite feeling overwhelmed and uncertain about the future. "I was so shocked, I couldn't believe it. I thought it was the worst thing that could have happened to me." Amy Widener's child was born to Tony Abercrombie, a 20-year-old friend of her brother. Their relationship was kept secret and no one in the family knew about their intimate relationship. When Amy's mother, Gloria, learned of her daughter's pregnancy, she took immediate action. She banned all contact between Amy and Tony and ordered Amy to completely cut ties with the father of her unborn child, setting strict rules for her future relationships. On October 25, 1987, Amy became a mother when she gave birth to her daughter Emily. Remarkably, just 6 days later, Amy returned to school, balancing her motherhood and academic responsibilities. Gloria Widener understood the importance of education to Amy's future and was always supportive and caring to help Amy with her studies. She also recognized Amy's need for a normal teenage life and time with her friends. Despite the challenges of motherhood, Amy was determined to study, receiving praise from her teachers for her hard work and dedication. Amy's family adapted well to having Emily in their lives and shared the responsibility of caring for her. Over time, things seemed to improve, especially for Amy, who was overcoming her challenges. Just when they felt stable, things took an unexpected turn. On November 13, 1989, 16-year-old Amy Widener woke up with a severe sore throat and decided to stay home from school with her 2-year-old daughter Emily. When her mother, Gloria, offered to take Emily to a babysitter, Amy decided to keep her daughter with her. After the family had breakfast, they parted ways for the day. Gloria went to work, while Amy's siblings went to school, leaving Amy and Emily at home. When Gloria could not reach Amy by phone at 9:30 a.m. and several hours later, she became concerned. She asked a neighbor to check on them. The neighbor reported that the house was quiet and unresponsive, prompting Gloria to leave work and rush home. When she arrived, she found Emily sitting on the stairs and called Amy, but there was no answer. Gloria entered Amy's bedroom. The situation in Amy's bedroom was both tragic and shocking. Amy was found dead and naked on the bed, with a lot of blood around her. Gloria called 911 in a panic. When the police arrived, they conducted a thorough search of Amy's house. At first, they suspected a break-in. They found that several stereo devices and a graphic equalizer, owned by Amy's brother, John Paul, were missing. Additionally, a piggy bank in Amy's room, a glass jar containing about $50 for school, was also missing. There was no sign of forced entry. The perpetrator may have entered through an unlocked back door or front door, or it was likely that Amy herself opened it. Key evidence was found in Amy's room, a bloody handprint on the wall and several hairs, both from her body and head, that were likely from her attacker. The medical examiner determined that Amy Widener had been hit in the head with a sharp object, sexually assaulted, and finally strangled. It is disturbing to think that Amy's 2-year-old daughter, Emily, may have witnessed these tragic events. Fortunately, she was found safe and unharmed. The police realized that Emily, although only 2 years old, might have valuable information. To help her feel comfortable, they used finger puppets while gently asking her questions about what she remembered. During this interaction, Emily, who was active in the room, only said that her mother seemed very angry that day. To collect evidence, the police collected the attacker's bloody fingerprints. They also collected the victim's clothes and bed linens from the crime scene to assist in the investigation of this tragic event. During the investigation of Amy's case, the police conducted inquiries among family, friends, and nearby residents. John Paul, Amy's 17-year-old brother, was also questioned by the police. However, he had a credible alibi and no evidence linked him to the incident. Tony Abier, Amy's ex-boyfriend and Emily's father, was also questioned. He expressed his deep love for Amy and denied any intention to harm her, and provided a strong alibi for the day of the murder. Police also investigated Troy Jackson, who lived next door to Amy and knew about a stereo system that had been stolen on the day of the murder. Troy denied any involvement and had no visible injuries. He provided hair samples that did not match those found at the crime scene and was cleared of suspicion after passing a polygraph test. In addition to the 3 main witnesses, police also spoke to Amy's other friends, neighbors, and classmates. They collected fingerprints and hair samples from all of them, but none of them were considered suspicious. Amy Widener's funeral, which took place shortly after her death, drew large crowds to pay their respects. Her passing had a profound impact on the community. Police were present at the funeral, discreetly observing attendees as part of their investigation. One particularly touching moment was the display of a beloved photograph of Amy, in which she wore her favorite white floral turtleneck. It was in this precious garment that Amy, a young girl whose life ended too soon, was laid to rest. After the tragic loss, Amy's family still held out hope that her killer would be caught and brought to justice. However, as the days passed, weeks and months passed, no suspects emerged. After Amy's death, Gloria Widener took in her niece Emily, taking on the role of her mother. The grief and fear weighed heavily on Gloria, as she was constantly haunted by thoughts of the killer and worried about her family's safety. She never left her daughter home alone and lived in a constant state of anxiety as the attacker remained at large. Although Gloria considered moving to a safer home, financial constraints left them with no choice, forcing them to endure these difficult times in their current home. Amy's friends were also deeply affected by the tragedy, fearing that they could be the criminal's next target. They asked their parents to guard the house, even boarded up the windows to prevent a similar incident. One day, Gloria returned home, expecting to find her younger daughters home from school. Instead, she found only eerie silence. The house was strangely empty. She saw the girls' outdoor shoes in their usual place, which worried her. With each step upstairs, her mind raced with terrifying thoughts of what could have happened. By the time she reached the bedroom door, Gloria braced herself for the worst. When she entered the bedroom, she was relieved to find her daughters asleep. As time passed, Amy's daughter, Emily, grew up without the burden of memories of the tragic events involving her biological mother. She had no recollection of the police interviews or being told about her mother's death. However, the police would occasionally return to check on Amy's family, inadvertently reminding them of the pain of that terrible day. Gloria revealed that, at some point, the constant reminders of the past became too much for her to bear. All she wanted was for the police to stop reopening old wounds and for her family to find peace, because nothing could bring Amy back. 13 years after Amy Wagner was murdered in 2002, something unexpected happened. The Indianapolis Police Department received a call from a 29-year-old man who claimed he had a dream in which Amy spoke to him about her death. He shared some details about the murder, but most of what he said had already been reported in the newspaper. The police investigated the man, who was 16 at the time and lived across the street from Amy. They ran his fingerprints and DNA to see if he had any connection to the case, but found no matches, so he was released. Although his call did not provide any new evidence, it did lead police back to the cold case. In 2002, they reconnected with some of Amy's friends and acquaintances, especially those who had been in legal trouble over the years. However, despite these new efforts, the investigation hit a dead end again, leaving the case unsolved. In 2011, a Facebook group called Remembering Amy was created by Amy's friends, which sparked interest in her unsolved murder. The police officer working the cold case was unfamiliar with Facebook, so he asked his colleague, Officer Bill Carter, to print out information from the group. This assignment piqued Bill's interest in the case. Although his background was in non-homicide crimes, he felt motivated to review Amy's murder case file in his spare time. Bill thoroughly examined the case, which was more than 20 years old. He reviewed every detail in the file, reassessed the evidence, checked school attendance records from the day of the murder, and analyzed Amy's funeral attendance list. He entered the case information into a database and discovered leads that had been overlooked, including several friends of Amy's brother who had never been interviewed by police and whose DNA had not been collected. In an effort to find new leads, Bill contacted Amy's family and friends in 2011 to collect the names of people who might have information about the case. Bill began collecting DNA samples from people who had been overlooked in the original investigation in 1989. After the murder, police surveyed the neighborhood where Amy lived and recorded the names of residents. Bill returned to these records and the area to check to see if any residents were still living at their original addresses. His investigation led him to a woman who lived across the street from the murder scene and was a neighbor and friend of Amy's. She struggled to recall the names of the boys Amy had befriended. While she recalled most of the names that had already been identified and investigated, she also mentioned a name that Bill had never heard before: Rodney Dink. In 2012, Bill received permission from the Cold Case Unit to officially investigate the Amy Widener case. His first task was to find Rodney Dink to determine if he was a suspect. Amy's family knew Rodney well because he was friends with Amy's brother, John Paul. They often spent time together biking and fishing. When Bill asked John Paul about Rodney, he described him as a quiet, mostly private person who had never aroused suspicion. Bill then went to the home of Rodney Dink, 40, who lived with his mother near Amy's family. Rodney worked at an auto parts store and had been divorced for some time. He had an adult son with whom he had little contact. When Bill arrived at Rodney's home, his mother answered the door and told him that Rodney was at work. Bill left his business card, asking Rodney to call him when he got home. That evening, Rodney called Bill, who quickly arranged a meeting to discuss Amy's murder case. Rodney agreed to meet and invited Bill to his home. However, when Bill returned to Rodney's home, Rodney was missing. Bill looked into Rodney's criminal history and discovered he had been convicted of assault in 1991 and burglary in 1997. Rodney's fingerprints were in the database, so they compared them to the fingerprints found at Amy's house. The purpose of the comparison was to either link or clear Rodney of the crime. The results showed that Rodney's fingerprints matched the bloody fingerprints at the crime scene. After 23 years, a suspect was identified, but Rodney disappeared from the house, leading to a search for him. The investigation took a turn when Rodney's credit card activity showed that he had rented a car equipped with an OnStar tracking system. The police tracked the car to Indianapolis, where Rodney was hiding at a friend's house. When confronted by the police, Rodney threatened them with a knife, claiming his innocence. In the ensuing chaos, he injured himself and attempted to attack police, but was eventually subdued with a taser, handcuffed and taken to hospital. During a 2-day police interrogation that was filmed, Rodney admitted to killing Amy. He said he intended to break into the house and had not expected Amy to come home because she was sick. Rodney described how he entered through a sliding glass door and was surprised by Amy, who attacked him, causing him to panic. In his haste, he picked up the nearest object and hit her in the head, tragically killing her. Over the course of 2 days, he spoke of his vague memories of that day, explaining that it had been 23 years since the murder. His description of the events was vague. At one point, he mentioned going to Amy's house with someone he called Bag. However, Rodney struggled to recall specific details about this friend, including his appearance. He said that Bag waited outside Amy's house before going inside, where the two confronted Amy. When asked about Emily, Rodney said that he did not see her during the incident and was unaware of her presence or crying, not realizing that Emily had been nearby throughout the entire incident. During questioning, Rodney remained calm and respectful, showing none of the typical signs of a murderer. Due to the time that had passed since the crime, his DNA was collected and, as expected, matched semen found on Amy's bedsheets and blankets in 1989. In a rare moment of honesty, Rodney told police, "I always tried to be a good person, but I guess deep down inside I'm not." Both fingerprints and semen at the crime scene were confirmed to be his, and there was no evidence that anyone else was involved. Rodney's confession shocked Amy's family. The quiet and unassuming man was also a close friend and classmate of Amy's brother, John Paul, who lived across the street and frequently visited their home. With the horrific crime he had committed. In a surprising twist, Rodney even attended Amy's funeral, grieving with the others and sending condolences to Gloria Widener. Police Bill later found Rodney's name in the funeral book from the funeral. It wasn't until he reviewed the case that he remembered Rodney being mentioned in 2003 by Tony Abercrombie, Amy's ex-boyfriend and Emily's biological father, who noted Rodney's frequent visits to Amy's family. Bill believes that in 1989, Rodney was never considered a suspect or questioned at the time. While investigating Rodney's past in 2012, police discovered another disturbing fact. Rodney's biological son, Dylan Dink, had been imprisoned for a crime committed in 2009. At the age of 16, Dylan killed his mother, Mary McHenry, after claiming that he acted in response to her abuse and insults. He used a baseball bat to inflict the fatal wounds. Tragically, Mary died from her injuries, and Dylan turned 17 just days after the incident. This situation was very similar to Rodney's own past, as he was only 18 when he killed Amy. The similarities between father and son committing serious crimes at a young age made police nervous. Rodney had little involvement in Dylan's upbringing, having divorced Mary early on and leaving her to raise her son alone. However, he attended Dylan's trial in 2009. Dylan accepted a plea deal that resulted in a 20-year prison sentence, meaning he was scheduled to be released in 2029 when he would be 37. In the case of Amy Widener, Rodney initially claimed that Bagg was his accomplice in the crime. However, just 10 days before his trial was set to begin in June 2013, 42-year-old Rodney changed his story and confessed to killing Amy himself, saying no one else was involved. Due to his confession and the evidence against him, Rodney was sentenced to 65 years in prison in 2013. After the case was over, Amy's family held a reunion with police officer Bill Carter to remember the 24 years without her. They released 24 balloons into the sky in her honor and expressed gratitude to Officer Bill for his essential contributions to the case. Officer Bill identified Rodney Dink as the perpetrator after only 12 days of investigation, essentially closing the case. In recognition of his exceptional efforts, Detective Bill Carter received an award from the Indianapolis Police Department in January 2014. Although he was offered a position in the homicide division, he decided to stay in his current role. Amy's daughter, Emily, grew up and graduated from the same high school her mother attended. She then went on to attend college. In search of more opportunities, she moved from Indianapolis to California. Amy's mother, Gloria, has publicly expressed her ongoing grief and daily remembrance of her daughter. She still lives in the house where the tragedy occurred, with Amy's room still decorated with pictures of her. The space now also welcomes Gloria's grandchildren for holiday visits, bringing joy and new life to a place once filled with sadness. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Christy Lynn Mullins. Christy Lynn Mullins was born on August 28, 1960, in Columbus, Ohio. She grew up in a family of 4 siblings, and they lived in a quiet neighborhood, away from the noise of the city. In the summer of 1975, when Christy was 14, she enjoyed spending time with her friends and sisters. They enjoyed going swimming at a nearby community, especially on hot days. Occasionally, Christy also babysat for families she knew. On August 22nd, a friend of Christy's asked her to babysit her child until late in the evening. The next day, Christy woke up around noon, and it was an extremely hot day, with temperatures reaching 93 degrees Fahrenheit. So Christy decided that a swim would be a great way to relax and cool off. She brought her younger sister, Kim, to the community with her. Kim jumped right into the water while Christy chose to relax on a lounge chair. A while later, her friend came to chat, and after a short conversation, the two left together. Kim was surprised when her sister, Christy, left her alone without saying a word. Instead of following her, Kim chose to stay at the pool. Later, when she returned home, her sister had not returned. After several hours without any sign of Christy, Kim began to worry. She decided to search the neighborhood for her sister and soon met a neighbor. The neighbor informed her that about an hour ago, the police had discovered the body of a little girl a few miles away, but they had not yet identified her. Kim rushed home to inform her parents of the situation. They quickly contacted the police, saying that their daughter was missing. The police advised them to go to the morgue, where they would show them the body of the dead girl. Initially, her parents had difficulty recognizing the girl because of the severe bruising on her face. However, the mother later discovered a birthmark on the girl's leg and recognized it as Christy. After identifying the girl, the police informed the shocked family of what had happened. At around 2:30 p.m., a man called 911 to report that he had found a human body in the woods behind the shopping center. He and his wife and son had gone there to buy toys for their children. Before entering the shopping center, the son asked to walk along a popular trail in the woods behind the building. This trail leads to a nearby river, which attracts casual walkers. After agreeing to let the boy walk, the parents allowed him to follow this path into the woods. When the family returned, they noticed a suspicious scene a short distance from the trail. Upon closer inspection, they saw a man lying on the ground, bending over someone and hitting them with a piece of wood. When the man discovered the family, he immediately got up and ran away. The father rushed to the scene and found a girl lying on the ground, covered in blood. His wife, who was studying medicine, tried to check for a pulse but could not find one. The father quickly ran to a nearby shopping mall and called the police from a store. He and his wife provided police with a description of the perpetrator. He was a young man, about 20 years old, tall and slim, with shoulder-length black hair. He was wearing jean shorts and boots at the time of the incident. Using this information, police created a sketch of the suspect and turned it over to patrol officers. The crime scene examination did not turn up any significant clues. Although police discovered a piece of wood that was used as the murder weapon, they were unable to find any evidence that could identify the perpetrator. Notable details from the crime scene included that Christie's hands were tied with telephone cords and that her clothing was in disarray, as her bikini top was pulled down and her t-shirt and shoes were found nearby. However, forensic analysis did not reveal any evidence of sexual assault. Police therefore theorized that the perpetrator may have intended to attack Christie, but something frightened him and he ran away. Christie's sister reported to police that she had left the pool with a friend named Carol. So they went to speak with Carol. Carol reported that she had received a suspicious phone call that day from an unidentified man claiming to be a local radio DJ. He told her about a cheerleading competition that was supposed to take place in their town, with the winners receiving free tickets to the state fair. The caller invited her to meet at the entrance to a forest trail behind the mall, where someone would provide more information about the event, which was supposed to start at 1:45 p.m. Carol's account of the events aroused the suspicions of the police. According to Carol, she had originally planned to attend the event with her sister. However, on the way, they encounter Christie and her sister. After a brief conversation, Carol invites Christie to come with her instead, and they decide to leave their sisters behind and head to the mall. When they reach the entrance to the woods, the girls sit on a fence and wait for someone to arrive. When no one appears after a while, Carol says she left Christie for a while to go to the mall and asks for the time. She returns a few minutes later, only to find Christie gone. Still waiting for a while longer, Christie does not reappear, prompting Carol to finally leave. The police investigation finds no evidence of cheerleading competitions in town, as the anonymous caller had reported. This leads them to two possible explanations. The caller could be the killer trying to lure Carol into the woods, or it could be a prank unrelated to the murder. Unfortunately, the call cannot be traced, making it impossible to identify the caller. Further investigation uncovered inconsistencies in Carol's story. According to Carol, she had met Christie and her sister on the street while walking to the mall. However, Christie's sister, Kim, disputed this claim, saying that she and Christie were at the pool and that Carol had joined them there. But that was not all. Later that evening, Christie's mother met Carol, who lived just a few dozen meters from their home, and they had a rather strange conversation. Carol apologized and said that things had gone too far. She said that she was supposed to be the target and that there were two people involved in the murder. However, when Christie's mother tried to get more information, Carol ended the conversation and left. The mother reported this to the police, who questioned Carol again. But Carol denied making these statements, maintaining that her original story was true. She later took a lie detector test, but showed no signs of deception when asked questions critical to Christie's case. As a result, the police took her off the suspect list and focused on finding other leads. The city was thrown into a state of widespread fear as news of the brutal murder spread in the days that followed. This fear was compounded by a disturbing realization: the police suspected the killer was a local resident, as they seemed to have a good understanding of the area behind the shopping center. Spurred on by this new information, the police launched a massive investigation, using every available resource. Their efforts were finally rewarded 3 days after Christie's murder, when a significant breakthrough was made in the case. At approximately 5 p.m., a Columbus Police Patrol officer spotted a man who closely resembled the composite sketch of Christie's killer. The patrol officer quickly notified the case officers, who arrived at the scene and asked the man to accompany them to the station for questioning. The man, 25-year-old Jack Carmen, agreed to cooperate. However, the police faced a problem. Jack had a significant intellectual disability, with an IQ estimated at around 50, according to various tests. Because of his condition, Jack required specialized medical care and lived in an apartment provided by a non-profit organization. He had difficulty with basic skills, including reading, writing, and speaking. Despite these challenges, the police on the Christie case could not ignore the striking resemblance between him and the composite sketch. Jack's interrogation was difficult and exhausting. Most of the time, he responded with short answers or remained silent. The police began to question whether Jack fully understood the meaning behind their questions. The interrogation lasted for 6 hours. Eventually, the police began to make some progress by asking the simplest and most specific questions possible. Using this approach, they were able to extract a confession from Jack. Jack stated that on the day of the incident, he began by leaving his apartment and taking a bus to the mall. His intention was to buy clothes, specifically pants and shirts. When he arrived at the mall, he walked across the parking lot toward the entrance and saw Christie sitting on a fence near a trail leading into the woods. Jack approached Christie, grabbed her, held her arms, and dragged her into the woods, where he assaulted her. After the assault, Christie attempted to flee. Jack caught up with her, picked up a nearby log, and repeatedly hit her on the head. He then fled the scene, running to the main road in front of the shopping center, where he boarded another bus. The next day, the police took Jack to the woods, where he identified the exact location of the crime scene. Jack also shared specific details with the police, such as the log breaking in half when it hit Christie, which only the perpetrator would know. The police assembled a lineup that included Jack and asked the couple who found Christie to identify the person they saw at the scene on the day of the crime. Both identified Jack. Jack was then formally charged with assault and murder. Although forensic experts found no evidence to confirm his testimony, Jack still confessed to committing sexual assault during the crime. Therefore, the prosecution decided not to dismiss the charges. The prosecutor initially sought the death penalty. However, Jack and his attorney opted for a plea bargain. Jack admitted his guilt to the judge, and as a result, he was sentenced to life in prison, avoiding the death penalty. The trial was quick, possibly due to the public interest in the case, with thousands of people following the proceedings. Just 11 days after the murder, on September 3rd, Jack Carmen was officially sentenced to life in prison. After the trial, public perception of Jack's guilt began to change. As more information about his confession and personal life emerged in the media, many began to question whether he was truly capable of committing such a crime. Those close to Jack never suspected his involvement in the crime, describing him as a non-aggressive and timid person who often lied when forced to lie. And an incident at a charity center where he took the blame for a broken boiler, even though someone else had done it. Jack's ability to honestly confess to the crime has also been questioned. Although he had significant difficulty speaking, police claimed that Jack provided a detailed description of the crime. However, those who knew Jack's suspect at the police guided him by asking leading questions that included relevant facts from the case. This means that if they asked, "Did you hit the victim with a piece of wood?" and Jack answered, "Yes," it could be misinterpreted as a confession. A woman involved in Jack's treatment revealed that when pressed, Jack would confess to anything. If he was threatened with the electric chair, he would likely comply with whatever the police asked him to do. Those who support Jack's innocence have also found that the police brought him to the crime scene at the same time as the witnesses, the couple who later identified him at the police station. They had seen Jack and knew he was the suspect. However, the police maintained that the couple had never met Jack, a claim that many found hard to believe. Several other events raised serious doubts about Jack's involvement in the case. Police were unable to find the bus driver or any passengers who could confirm that Jack was on the bus he claimed to have taken home, as stated in his confession. Furthermore, several people at the charity building where Jack lived and worked gave testimony. They reported seeing Jack at 1:30 p.m. If he was indeed there, it is unlikely that he would have taken the bus to the shopping center on the outskirts of town and committed the murder at 1:50 p.m. He would have had to have taken the bus to the outskirts of town, which would have taken at least 40 minutes. Even if he had left immediately after being seen, the timestamps do not match. This led many to question Jack's guilt and believe that the police pressured him into a false confession. Even Christie's parents began to suspect that Jack was not the real killer. On September 9th, just 6 days after the verdict, about 70 people gathered in front of the town hall to draw attention to the case and demand a thorough investigation. A public committee was formed to fight for justice. This led to Jack finding new representation, as his new lawyer quickly filed a petition for a review of the case. A few months later, a judge revoked Jack's confession and ordered a new trial. Now, the prosecution had to prove his guilt almost from scratch, which seemed like an almost impossible task. Christ's father, Norman Mills, began his own investigation while preparations for the new trial were underway, dissatisfied with the police's efforts to find his daughter's killer. Not wanting to rely solely on the police, he took it upon himself to seek answers. Shortly after the murder, Norman and several neighbors searched the woods, where they discovered a pair of bloody jean shorts and men's underwear. They turned these items over to the police, who initially ignored them during their investigation. However, it remains unknown whether these items were connected to the case or were even tested. Jack's new trial began in 1977, 2 years after the murder. The defense team had two main goals: to prove Jack's innocence and to identify the real killer. They suspected Henry Newell, the 25-year-old man who had discovered Christ's body along with his wife, as a suspect. When the trial began, Jack's lawyers compiled a long list of reasons to suspect Henry of the murder, and the list continued to grow throughout the trial. Henry initially gained attention for his extensive criminal record. As a teenager, Henry had been in trouble with the law several times, leading to 3 prison terms. Notably, he escaped from prison twice before being caught and sent back. At the time of Jack's trial, Henry was serving his 4th prison sentence for arson in order to collect insurance money. Furthermore, when lawyers reviewed the evidence from Christ's case, they discovered several suspicious details. In his testimony, Henry claimed to have discovered the body, approached it, and tossed aside a piece of bloody wood. Although he explained that he was in shock at the time, this action still raised many questions. It is unclear why Henry would have picked up the murder weapon and moved it away from the body without any logical reason. He also claimed that he thought the girl was still alive and tried to save her by taking off his shirt and holding it to her face. This action was also suspicious, as it was unclear whether Henry was actually trying to stop the bleeding or if his shirt had become stained with blood during the killing, causing him to create an alibi for the stains. Jack's lawyer found a store employee at the mall where Henry ran to call the police. She said that he was not wearing a shirt but jean shorts. However, when the police arrived, Henry had changed into a different pair of pants. The employee also reported that Henry had a new, obvious bruise on his face, indicating that he had been beaten by someone. When asked why this detail was not disclosed to the police immediately, the employee said that no one asked her specifically about it. The police themselves should have noticed this bruise, but they ignored it at the time. Henry also agreed to take a polygraph test, but ended up vomiting into the machine, rendering the test uncompleted. The police did not conduct any further tests. Henry's neighbor was another key witness. He reported seeing fresh scratches on Henry's hands as they spoke on the night of the murder. The neighbor also claimed to have seen a telephone cord in Henry's garage that matched the cord used to tie the victim's hands. Furthermore, the neighbor shared a disturbing story that Henry had told him. Henry claimed that he knew Carol, Christ's 14-year-old friend, and that they had swum naked in the pool together when Henry was 25. This revelation shocked everyone involved in the case, as it revealed a disturbing relationship between Henry and Carol. While there was no concrete evidence to support this claim, it did suggest that Henry knew Carol, who was directly involved in the case. His wife Pam also testified in court. She said that everything happened exactly as they told the police on the first day. She explained that the family had gone to the mall and their son had wanted to go for a walk, which led them to the woods where they discovered the body. From that point on, Henry remained at home, only leaving briefly to chase away neighborhood kids who were throwing fireworks into their yard. Henry was brought from jail to testify in court, where he stuck to his original story and maintained his innocence in the case. One of the most important moments of the trial was the playing of the entire audio recording of Jack's interrogation. After watching the recording, it became clear that Jack had been pressured by the police to confess to the murder. Jack barely spoke and seemed to have no idea what the police wanted from him. However, a more dramatic development occurred on the fifth day of the trial when a surprise witness appeared, a testimony that neither the prosecution nor Jack's attorneys had anticipated. The surprise witness was Henry's stepson, Bobby, and his statements would shock those following the case. The boy explained what had really happened that day. Henry had left the house to scare away some kids who were throwing firecrackers in their yard, but Henry had not only been out for a few minutes as his mother had said. Henry had been gone for more than half an hour. When Henry returned, he had lost his shirt and slippers and had scratches on his face and arms. Henry then spoke privately with Pam before telling Bobby that they were all going to the mall. However, instead of going shopping, Henry and Pam took Bobby to a nearby trail, where he had not asked to go for a walk. In the woods, they found one of Henry's torn slippers, and a little further, they came across Christ's body. Henry's mother told Bobby to keep what he had seen a secret. Years later, after talking to his biological father, Bobby decided it was time to reveal the truth. His grandmother also testified in court and recounted a strange incident involving Henry that occurred at Christ's funeral. On the way back, she said that it was a tragedy, and Henry suddenly replied, "It will teach her to keep quiet." In addition, a friend of Henry's testified that he had confessed to killing Christ. According to this friend, Henry claimed that the act was unintentional, not intentional. In the end, this trial left little doubt that Jack was not involved in the crime, and all charges against him were eventually dropped. But this is where things get interesting. despite the overwhelming evidence pointing to Henry's involvement. The prosecutor stated that he had no intention of pursuing the case against him. The prosecutor criticized the police for ignoring many clues and evidence that were available from the beginning of the investigation. This criticism was met with widespread public outrage. As a result, the prosecutor agreed to reopen the case 2 days later. However, there was still a major problem. The new investigation relied heavily on the initial findings, including the statements of Henry and Pam. As a result, the police continued to operate under the initial assumption that Christie's body had been discovered in the woods with a long-haired shirtless man nearby. They focused on finding new suspects who fit this description, similar to Jack. Unsurprisingly, this approach yielded no results. Despite months of continued efforts, the case eventually stalled. Christie's father pursued justice relentlessly. He even filed a civil lawsuit against Jack, not because he thought Jack was guilty, but to gain access to the case files. By doing so, he hoped to gather more information about the case. Unfortunately, this effort was ultimately unsuccessful. Christie's father died of cancer in 2006, still without the answers he was looking for. For years, the investigation into Christie's murder went dormant, until 2013 when former attorney John Allard decided to reopen the case. John took the investigation into his own hands and contacted everyone involved, looking for new leads. Christie's family gave him a box full of her father's files, compiled over the years until his death. After reviewing the documents and speaking to dozens of people, John became convinced that the killer was none other than Henry. During the investigation, John discovered that Christie's friend Carol smoked marijuana and found evidence that she had purchased marijuana from Henry. This connection led John to suspect that Carol may have fabricated the story about meeting a DJ in the woods, and that she may have planned to meet Henry to buy marijuana instead. It is possible that Carol invited Christie along, using the DJ story as a convincing excuse. Alternatively, a darker scenario emerged, in which Carol may have acted on Henry's behalf, luring Christie into the woods to attack her. And Henry had scratches and bruises on his body, suggesting that Christie had fought back before she died. As John continued to investigate the case, he discovered that Henry had committed many other crimes, including arson, domestic violence, and assault. Another notable incident involved the death of Henry's wife, Pam, in 1982. Despite filing for divorce, Pam was still living with Henry when she was found dead in their apartment. The official cause of death was an overdose of sleeping pills. However, Pam's family members were skeptical and suggested that Henry may have altered the pills. What was even more unusual was that, although Pam had clearly consumed a large amount of sleeping pills, no packaging for the pills was found in the apartment, as she would have been unable to dispose of them after taking such a large amount. In 2013, Henry died of cancer at the age of 63, but John persisted in his quest for justice for Christie. He published a book compiling all the available information about the case, which sparked public interest. Christie's family, along with others, have called for the investigation to be reopened. Notably, some of Henry's relatives contacted John, confessing that their entire family knew Henry was the one who killed Christie but kept quiet. A family member of Henry's recounted that a few months before her 16th birthday, Henry gave her a car as a gift and they went for a drive together. At one point, he asked her to stop the car, turned to her and confessed to killing Christie, describing the crime in detail. The woman did not believe him, thinking he had made up the story because he had been drinking heavily. However, after reading a book about the case, the woman's memory of that conversation returned and the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. This revelation eventually led to the reopening of the murder investigation in May 2014. The police thoroughly reinvestigated the case for several months, re-interviewing many witnesses and re-evaluating potential leads. A significant breakthrough came from Henry's confession to a family member, in which he claimed to have assaulted Christie. Initially, medical experts found no evidence to support this claim. However, using modern technology, police re-examined Christie's clothing and discovered small, previously undetected semen stains. Unfortunately, these stains were too small to extract enough DNA for analysis. The investigation dragged on until late 2015, when police held a press conference to announce their findings. 40 years after the murder, they finally announced that Henry was the one who committed the crime. However, since he was no longer alive, they were unable to take the case to court. As a result, the case was officially declared solved. Although some details of the crime remain unclear due to the lack of a confession, police felt confident that they understood the general circumstances surrounding the murder. It is possible that Henry went to the trail behind the shopping center after leaving his home. Carol may have asked him to meet her there to buy marijuana, but this has not been confirmed. When he arrived, he encountered Christie, who was alone, and decided to attack her. He tied her hands with telephone cords and took her deeper into the woods. Christie defended herself, scratching Henry and hitting him in the face. Henry may have then wrestled her to the ground and killed her with a nearby log. After the attack, Henry returned home and told his wife what had happened. Together, they devised a plan that would allow him to avoid being held accountable for his actions. Carol's involvement in the case remains unclear, and it's possible she will speak out one day. A recent press conference revealed that the police mishandled the case years ago, with the current police apologizing to the Christie family for the negligence of their predecessors. The initial evidence was enough to charge Henry with murder. But it appears the original police chose to ignore it. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Turpin family. David Allen Turpin was born on October 17, 1961, in Princeton, West Virginia, to Betty and James Turpin. He grew up in a deeply religious family. As a student at Princeton High School, David was actively involved in several extracurricular activities, including the Bible Club, chess club, science club, and a cappella chorus. After graduating from high school, he attended Virginia Tech University in Blacksburg, Virginia, where he studied electrical engineering. Notably, David demonstrated exceptional skills in computer engineering, which eventually led him to secure employment at prominent defense technology companies such as Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin. Louise Anna Turpin was born on May 24, 1968, in Princeton, West Virginia. She was the oldest of 6 children to parents Phyllis and Wayne Robinette. Her father was a preacher and her mother worked at Walmart and singing in their church choir. However, Louise's childhood was extremely painful. Her parents often argued, which resulted in them treating their 6 children very poorly. Louise, her younger sisters, and her mother were sexually abused as children by a family member, a traumatic experience. This dark family secret was hidden for years but was later revealed by Louise's younger sisters. Despite facing their own distress, Louise was protective by shielding her younger siblings from their abuser and comforting them during their parents' intense conflicts. Her younger sister Elizabeth described her as gentle, compassionate, and caring, always working to comfort them during this difficult time. When Louise was 15 years old, she met 22-year-old David Turpin at church, and then they started dating each other. Since they feared Louise's parents might not approve, they decided to keep their relationship private. After her mother, Phyllis, found out about the relationship, she initially had concerns but eventually accepted David and Louise's bond. This was partly because David came from a Christian family and partly due to Louise's reassurances. However, they still keep this relationship a secret from Louise's father, Wayne, as they were aware that he might be very upset if he found out. 5 years after graduating from Princeton High School, 23-year-old David visited the school where Louise was a student. He managed to convince the school staff to let him take Louise out of class. Louise willingly left with David, and they set off on a journey south to get married in secret. Their plan was to elope without telling anyone. When Louise's parents found out she was missing, they contacted the authorities. However, before the authorities can catch up with them, the couple had already reached Texas, where they intended to get married without anyone knowing. Surprisingly, David and Louise agreed to return to West Virginia without resistance. When they arrived, they thought that Wayne and Phyllis would be angry, but instead, they received a calm reaction. Initially, Wayne was angry with Phyllis for allowing their daughter to be in a relationship with David, but he eventually understood that he couldn't separate two people in love. Wayne eventually gave in and consented to their marriage. The couple got married in a simple ceremony in Pearisburg, Virginia, on February 11, 1985. 2 years later, Wayne and Phyllis got divorced, and Wayne started working as the chief deputy assessor in Mercia County. After her marriage, Louise began to drift away from her family. Free from her parents' rules, she was happy to start her own independent life. In 1988, Louise and her family welcomed their first child, a daughter. 18 months later, in 1990, they had another child. When David got a job transfer with General Dynamics, the family moved to Fort Worth, Texas, and settled in the modern neighborhood of Meadow Creek. With David's high-paying job, the Tepins enjoyed a luxurious lifestyle. To show off their new wealth, Louise invited her family from West Virginia to visit. Since she grew up without much money, Louise wanted to share her new success with her family. David and Louise kindly paid for their family's travel and accommodation expenses during the visit. In 1991, the Turpin family had a son, bringing them more joy. However, the family struggled with significant debt by 1992, despite David's high income. Instead of cutting back on spending, they continue to live a lavish lifestyle and continue to have more children. In 1993, Louise got pregnant with her fourth child, a girl. Every year, Louise's family visited the Tepins, but they didn't know the Tepins were struggling financially. To keep up appearances, Louise took care of all expenses during her family's visits, hiding their financial problems. In 1994, the Turpin family's eldest daughter started first grade at Meadow Creek Elementary. Her greasy and messy hair, dirty clothes, and poor hygiene suggested that she was being neglected by her parents. As a result, her classmates teased her and made fun of her for being dirty. The following year, 1995, the Turpin family had one more son. In 1996, they took a family trip to visit Louise's relatives. At the time, the Tepins were struggling financially, but they didn't seem to worry about it and continued to spend a lot of money, taking their relatives out to expensive meals. In the summer of 1996, Elizabeth, Louise's sister, traveled with the Turpin family to their home in Fort Worth for the holidays. During the trip, the family stopped at a casino in Louisiana, where Louise and David left Elizabeth in charge of the children while they gambled. Louise asked Elizabeth to keep their activities a secret. However, Louise's gamble was in direct conflict with her Christian upbringing, which taught her that gambling was morally wrong. Unfortunately, their gamble ended in losses, which led to a fierce argument between David and Louise. David believed Louise had a gambling problem and blamed her for their financial struggles. During her stay with the Turpin family, Elizabeth witnessed the family's disturbing dynamics firsthand. David and Louise showed little affection towards their children and controlled nearly every aspect of their lives. Simple tasks like using the restroom or eating required permission from David and Louise. Moreover, Elizabeth found David's behavior especially unsettling. He regularly entered the bathroom while she was showering, watching her and making her feeling discomfort and uncomfortable. The Turpin family's problems started to worsen in 1997. In May of that year, they had another child. However, in September, concerns about her oldest daughter's health began to emerge. She was dirty and showed signs of possible sexual abuse. As a result, she was taken to the principal's office to talk about her home life. Unfortunately, no action was taken to address her situation. The family had another child in 1998, increasing their number to 6. Despite David's high-paying job, the family fell deeply into debt due to their frequent gambling. This led to significant financial difficulties. In 1999, the eldest daughter stopped attending school, followed by the other children. The parents claimed they were homeschooling, but this was not true. The bank foreclosed on the family's Fort Worth home in 1998, forcing the Tippins to move to a less populated area in Rio Vista, Texas. However, the new house was kept in a disgusting state. The owners who moved in after the Tippins reported finding dirt stains and a foul smell, suggesting the presence of feces. Before moving to the Rio Vista house, the family had their 7th child. Between 2001 and 2007, the Turpin family had 5 more children, bringing the total to 13. As time went on, the parents' neglect turned into physical abuse. They would hit, slap, choke, and whip their children for minor reasons such as using the bathroom without permission. Shockingly, the children were only allowed to bathe once a year. The children were also malnourished. David and Louise bought delicious food, but they know to let their children eat it. Instead, they made their kids watch as they left the food untouched, leaving the children to suffer from hunger. This was a heartbreaking and inhumane situation that would have a profound impact on the children's lives. The children were severely malnourished due to being fed cheap frozen meals, leading to stunted physical growth and pale complexions that made them appear younger than their actual age. Additionally, the lack of social interaction and emotional abuse significantly impacted their mental development. In 2004, the Turpin family moved to a nicer trailer, leaving behind their previous home in Rio Vista. This decision was made because their old house had become uninhabitable due to the overwhelming amount of trash and dead rodents. In 2008, Louise had a conversation with her younger sister Teresa that left her stunned. Louise, 40, revealed that she and her husband David no longer attended church, a huge change from their family's strict Christian upbringing. Instead, David and Louise became interested in Satanism and used Ouija boards. Louise also confessed that them was involved in swinging, which meant they had sex with other couples they met online. What's more, they would often leave their younger children at home with their older siblings while they met strangers online. It became clear that Louise was the primary participant in these activities, with David acting as her accomplice by providing transportation and waiting for her during the encounters. This big change in her sister, Louise, from a caring and responsible person to someone almost unrecognizable, was deeply disturbing to Teresa. Meanwhile, the Turpin family moved to Marietta and made frequent visits to Disneyland, where they took many happy photos in matching outfits. Louise sent these photos to her family, with whom she had limited contact through Skype, and kept the children isolated from them. The photos reassured Louise's family that the children seemed to be in good spirits, despite appearing underweight. David and Louise had a strong fascination with Disneyland. This is evident from that they have come here many times, and they have recorded these experiences through photographs. In 2014, the family relocated to Peru, California, about 20 miles north of Paris, previously mentioned as Marietta. By this point, the abuse and violence against the children had become to extreme levels. David and Louise restrained the children to their beds using ropes, and if they tried to escape, they would replace the ropes with chains and padlocks. The children were forced to spend around 20 hours a day locked in their room, surrounded by a foul smell that filled the air. In 2015, the family had their 13th and final child. The family took a trip to Las Vegas to celebrate David and Louise's 30th wedding anniversary. They chose to renew their vows at the Elvis Chapel, which was a stark contrast to the abuse the children suffered at home. One of their children, 17 years old, found the courage to escape through a window and call the police to report the abuse. During the 20-minute 911 call, the girl described the terrible living conditions and the many abuses she and her siblings endured. She had photographic evidence and waited for the police to arrive. When they got there, they found a malnourished girl who looked much younger than her age. The girl gave the police pictures of the inside of the house. The police discovered the dark secrets the family had kept hidden. When police officers entered the house, they were immediately hit with a strong, foul smell that made it difficult to breathe. Despite the overpowering odor, they continued their search and were shocked by what they found. 3 of the younger children were chained to their beds. The house was extremely dirty and filled with trash, and the children did not have access to basic necessities like bathrooms. The police quickly took the younger children to the Riverside University Medical Center for care, while the older children were taken to the Corona Regional Medical Center for evaluation and treatment. On January 14, 2018, the authorities arrested David and Louise Turpin, accusing them of child abuse and torture. 4 days later, the couple was formally charged with multiple crimes, including 12 counts of torture, 7 counts of abusing a dependent adult, 6 counts of child abuse and neglect, and 12 counts of false imprisonment, with these charges applied to both David and Louise equally. Also faced a separate charge for engaging in a lewd act with a minor under the age of 14. Notably, among the Turpin children, the 2-year-old was unique in showing no apparent signs of abuse or torture. The Turpin children suffered severe physical and emotional abuse. The parents physically harmed them, including throwing them down the stairs, which resulted in nerve damage. The children lacked basic knowledge about life, further highlights the neglect they suffered. Although the parents bought toys for them, they were not allowed to play with these toys. The children's sleep was also severely restricted. They had to stay awake late into the night, often until 4 or 5 a.m., and were not permitted to go to bed before then. On January 24, 2018, the judge ordered David and Louise to have no direct contact with their children for 3 years. Any communication would have to be through their lawyers. A few months later, on June 21, 2018, the court decided there was enough evidence to put David and Louise on trial. Finally, on February 22, 2019, David and Louise changed their pleas, both pleading guilty to a total of 14 charges, including torture, abuse of dependent adults, false imprisonment, and dangerous for children. In a surprising turn of events, the court proceedings brought about an emotional reunion between the parents and their children. According to the children's statements, they had forgiven their parents and still loved them. Each child expressed concern for their parents' well-being and shared that they were doing well in their new lives. David and Louise, overcome with emotion, apologized sincerely for their past actions and expressed their deep love for their children, wishing them success and happiness. David and Louise was given a life imprisonment sentence with the possibility of parole after 25 years. As of March 2022, Louise, who is 53 years old, and David, who is 60 years old, are both eligible for parole in 2037. The severe abuse and neglect in the Turpin household shocked the community and left many questioning why it went undetected for so long. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Megan Landowski. Located on the shores of the Chesapeake Bay in Portsmouth, Virginia, is a bustling seaport town that is also home to both the U.S. Navy and Coast Guard. The town's tree-lined streets are home to naval officers and their families. Among them is Navy officer Chris Short, his wife Angela, and 3 stepchildren, Elizabeth, Megan, and Corey. After a year stationed at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, Chris was transferred to a naval hospital in Portsmouth, much to his family's delight. 16-year-old Megan, the eldest of the siblings, was excited to start her new life in Portsmouth. She promptly signed up for dance classes, as she had a strong passion for dance. Megan had a natural ability and quickly excelled in various dance styles, starting with ballet. Her mother, Angela, described Megan as a lovely, friendly, and talented young woman who easily settled into her new school, Woodrow Wilson High School. Megan was a lively and kind person, and that helped her swiftly made friends at her prestigious dance high school. However, she longed to attend a regular high school to be with her neighborhood friends. On Thursday, April 10, 2008, Megan woke up early for school and had a conversation with her mother about an upcoming test. They said their goodbyes, and Megan headed off to class. Unbeknownst to her mother, Angela, this would be the last time she saw her daughter alive. Megan's school day finished earlier than usual, so she headed home. Her mother had asked her to call as soon as she arrived. When Megan got home, she left a voicemail for her mother, telling her all about her day, letting her know she was safe, and saying she loved her. After that, Megan started making herself some lunch. However, the situation took a devastating turn around 4 p.m. that day. Chris, Megan's stepfather, came home to find the front door open. At first, he wasn't too worried, knowing Megan had been reminded to keep it closed. But he planned to remind her again. As he called out her name while walking through the house, he was met with only silence. As he entered the kitchen, he was met with a horrific scene. Megan was lying lifeless on the floor, a victim of murder. Chris later described the scene, saying Megan looked like a porcelain doll, eerily still and staring blankly into space. Local detective Doug Funkhauser was on his way to celebrate his anniversary with his wife when he received a distressing call about the murder of a young girl in town. He rushed to the scene, where he was met with a shocking and disturbing sight. As he neared the house, he noticed blood stains on the door handle. Inside, he found Megan's body on the kitchen floor, partially naked and surrounded by a large pool of blood. She had multiple stab wounds on her back, neck, face, and throat, and her mouth was sealed shut with tape. As a seasoned investigator, Detective Doug had seen many brutal cases, but this one stood out due to the victim's young age. The fact that he had 3 children of his own made him even more determined to catch the perpetrator and bring them to justice. Investigators found no signs that the killer had broken into the house. However, a leaf found inside the house, which matched the bush outside the first-floor window, suggested that the attacker entered through that window. The assault is believed to have started in an upstairs bedroom. Signs of a struggle were evident, with the bed in disarray. On the floor, police found Megan's underwear. An adhesive tape box discovered under the bed was matched to the tape used to restrain Megan's arms and cover her face. Bloodstains on the tape were collected for further analysis. Additionally, pillows, sheets, and blankets from the bed were collected for forensic examination. Further investigation of the bedroom revealed new evidence. Seminal fluid was found on the duvet and in Megan's underwear, indicating that she had been sexually assaulted before being brutally murdered. Downstairs, Megan sustained 43 stab wounds, 11 of which were inflicted after she had already died. Her body was discovered naked from the waist down, with her arms bound behind her back using tape. The forensic team quickly identified a murder weapon when they noticed 2 knife was missing from its holder on the kitchen counter. Later, a knife was found in the sink. It was determined that Megan was first attacked in her room but managed to escape downstairs, where she was fatally assaulted. The perpetrator then moved through the house, leaving footprints behind. After washing their hands in the sink, they left one of the 2 knives used in the murder. The other knife, taken from the kitchen, was found in a nearby storm drain. Detectives urgently needed to catch the killer. They quickly started investigating, thoroughly searching the neighborhood for witnesses who may have seen or heard something suspicious during the crime. However, no one came forward with any relevant information. It seemed the perpetrator had escaped in broad daylight. The town was gripped with fear, as parents worried about their children's safety, and many were too afraid to sleep at night knowing a killer was still at large. After the initial shock of their daughter's murder, Angela and Chris quickly told the police who they suspected was responsible. They accused Robert Hickey, someone they used to know, who had a troubled past, and they were confident in their accusation. When Megan was 16, she was sexually assaulted by Robert Hickey, a Navy colleague of her stepfather Chris. Robert and Chris worked together as technicians and had become close friends. Chris and his family would often invite the Robert over. After being sexually assaulted, Megan became withdrawn and her grades started to slip. Chris noticed the change in her and asked what was wrong, but Megan was hesitant to talk about it at first. Eventually, she opened up to Chris and told him that Robert had been secretly assaulting her. Chris was furious and disgusted. He immediately cut off all ties with the Robert family and reported the incidents. 5 months before her murder, Megan's parents had started legal proceedings against Robert, and a trial was pending. Now, they suspected that Robert had killed Megan to prevent her from testifying against him in court. They thought he was afraid of damaging his reputation and going to prison. Megan had even expressed her fear that Robert would come after her, and sadly, it seemed her fears had come true. Officers went to Robert's home to search for evidence linking him to a murder. Although they didn't find any direct evidence, a later examination of his computer, they discovered he had deleted some data. A deleted file was recovered, containing illicit images of minors, which led to Robert being charged with possessing child pornography. This made him the main suspect in the murder investigation. When questioned about the murder, Robert appeared nervous but claimed he was at the Navy base all day. He denied any involvement and said he didn't leave the base. However, after checking his alibi with colleagues, police found a gap in his timeline, suggesting he could have been suspect. Security footage was checked, but it showed that Robert had not left the base. Despite this, he was still considered a suspect and could not be completely cleared of suspicion. A DNA sample was collected from Robert to compare with the DNA found at the crime scene. However, the results revealed that there was no match, ruling Robert out as Megan's killer. This unexpected outcome left the officers disheartened, as they were now without leads or suspects other. The focus then shifted to Chris, who had discovered Megan's body. After collecting a DNA sample, Chris was quickly cleared as a suspect. Megan's family members, including her younger brother Corey, were also eliminated as suspects. An autopsy showed that Megan was murdered with extreme brutality, described as an overkill. This level of violence indicated that the perpetrator was fueled by intense anger, which raised questions about their motive. Megan was well-liked and didn't appear to have any enemies. It seemed likely that the killer was someone she knew. However, the lack of obvious enemies made it even more puzzling as to who could have committed such a horrific crime. As the investigation continued without identifying any suspects, Megan's parents were faced with the disturbing reality that her case may remain unsolved forever, denying them justice for their daughter. To search new leads, detectives looked into Megan's school life, looking into whether she might have had a secret boyfriend, someone who admired her, or an enemy within her school. They questioned one of Megan's close friends, hoping to gain useful information, but the friend couldn't provide any significant details. The police then spoke with other people from Woodrow Wilson High School who knew Megan. They discovered that she had been in a few romantic relationships, but none of them were serious. Although none of these individuals seemed suspicious, but the police still took DNA samples from these people for further investigation. Forensic experts analyzed DNA evidence from the crime scene to determine the perpetrator's geographical origin. The results suggested that the perpetrator was an African-American male. After 6 months with no significant leads, a classmate provided a list of boys Megan had flirted with. The police reviewed the list and found that all the individuals, except one, had already been interviewed. The exception was 17-year-old Robert Lee Barnes. Megan had met Barnes through a performance arts program at Churchill High School, where they both participated. Megan had told a friend that she thought Barnes had feelings for her, but she didn't feel the same way. Barnes was a talented violinist and a diligent student with no disciplinary issues. He was friends with Megan and had visited her home several times. Her parents described him as polite and kind. When questioned by police, Barnes followed the standard procedure and described Megan as kind. Initially, the police interview with Robert did not raise any suspicions. However, when asked if he would be willing to provide a DNA sample, Robert hesitated, then he refusing. This refusal was unusual, as all of Megan's other classmates had agreed to cooperate. When questioned about his refusal, Robert explained that his mother would not approve of him providing a DNA sample. The police clarified that, as he's 17 years old, Robert did not need his mother's consent. Nevertheless, Robert declined again, leaving the investigators with the feeling that something was not quite right about him. At the end of the interview, Robert was requested to obtain his mother's consent for the DNA sample and to contact the investigators afterward. The next day, Robert requested a meeting with the investigators. When asked if he had obtained his mother's consent, he replied that he had not. However, he offered to provide a DNA sample in the form of the bubble gum he was chewing. He removed the gum from his mouth, placed it in a latex glove, and handed it over to the investigators. Despite this, the investigators continued to suspect that Robert might be hiding something. Later on, the detective got a call from the lab that was analyzing the bubble gum. The lab asked where the gum had come from. After the detective confirmed that he saw Barnes put the gum into the glove, the lab asked if Barnes was under constant watch. This was surprisingly, because the DNA on the gum belonged to a female. It turned out that Barnes had switched the gum he was chewing with a different piece, which he then gave as his sample. On October 23, 2008, Barnes was brought in for questioning again, this time with his mother. The police wanted to confront him with the DNA results. During the interview, after being questioned about the gum, Barnes made a slip of the tongue by saying, "This happened on Thursday." Up to that point, no individual interviewed by police knew the exact date and time of the murder. When questioned about this by the police, Barnes gave a very unreasonable and suspicious explanation. He said that Megan had invited him to her home. Upon arrival, he found her being held at gunpoint by a masked person. According to Barnes, the attacker then pointed the gun at him and forced him to tie Megan up. Barnes further said that he was forced to sexually assault Megan against his will. He then stated that they all went downstairs, where the assailant seized a knife and stabbed Megan. Additionally, Barnes stated that the attacker compelled him to inflict an injury on himself, thereby leaving his blood at the scene. However, Barnes had made up this story to make himself appear as a victim and explain away any evidence that might implicate him. The police were not convinced by his story and do not believe any of his testimony. Police presented Barnes with evidence of footprints found at the scene, noting that only his footprints were present, with no sign of the alleged assailant's footprints. However, before Barnes could respond, his mother interrupted, defending his character and stating that he was a good and innocent kid. However, after taking a DNA sample from Barnes and analyzing it, the results revealed a match between his DNA and DNA evidence from the crime scene, contradicting his claims of innocence. Consequently, Robert Lee Barnes was arrested and charged with the murder of Megan Landowski. Megan's parents were shocked by the news, and they struggled to understand how the quiet boy who rode the school bus with their daughter could commit such a violent act. According to the police investigation, Barnes likely entered the home through a window that afternoon, sexually assaulted Megan in her bedroom, finally brutally killing her. Megan managed to escape downstairs, but Barnes chased after her and stabbed her multiple times with a kitchen knife, even after she had died. He then left the scene and continued with his life as if nothing had happened. Investigators believe that Barnes had become fixated on Megan, who only wanted a friendship. When Megan rejected his advances, Barnes became coercive and violent, ultimately leading to a tragic outcome. In September 2009, Barnes accepted a plea deal that allowed him to avoid being tried as an adult, despite having turned 18. He pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and aggravated sexual battery. Robert Lee Barnes was sentenced to 42 years in prison and is currently serving his sentence at Red Onion State Prison in Wise County, Virginia. Regardless of whether Barnes was motivated by love, desire, anger, or rejection, nothing justifies his heinous actions. Instead of moving on, Barnes chose a dark path that led to a tragic end. This choice not only took an innocent life but also destroyed his own and hurt the people who Megan's loved ones. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Dawn Hatcheney. Dawn Hatcheney was born on December 5, 1969, in Seattle, Washington. Her parents are Donald Tihara and Diana Parle. Her father, Donald, worked at a shipyard, and her mother, Diana, ran the household. Dawn is the oldest child and only daughter, with 3 younger brothers, Dennis, Darren, and Derek. Her family lives in Bremerton, Washington. According to her mother Diana, Dawn showed her religious devotion from an early age, embracing her faith and accepting God into her life when she was 4 years old. Dawn's childhood was difficult, however. Her parents suffered from anxiety and depression, leading to frequent conflicts at home. Despite these challenges in her childhood, Dawn did well in school, promising herself to get good grades. At age 12, she entered the Scripps National Spelling Bee, an experience that not only led her to the White House but also gave her the opportunity to meet the late President Ronald Reagan. Dawn graduated from Bremerton Christian School as valedictorian in 1988 before attending Northwest College of the Church of God in Seattle. While in college, Dawn met Nick Hatchey and they quickly formed a strong bond. However, her friends were concerned when she started calling him the one after only a few dates. They wanted Dawn to find someone who would truly care for and support her, but they worried that Nick was too aggressive and self-assured, which didn't seem to fit Dawn's personality. Interestingly, Nick's upbringing has some similarities to Dawn's. Nick was born and raised in Poulsbo, a coastal city in Washington. His family life was difficult from an early age. His father, Dan, was constantly immersed in his work as a mechanic, always distant when at home, neglecting his time and responsibilities for the family. His mother, Sandra, ran a daycare in the home and provided foster care, but Nick felt abandoned. He often confided in friends that he felt less loved than his siblings and even his foster children, and that his mother's affection for him was distasteful. Life was difficult with a depressed mother and a father who often neglected the family. Nick felt abandoned and emotionally isolated. Despite this, he found comfort in the Bible and became deeply involved in Christianity. His faith gave him confidence throughout his adolescence. Nick and Dawn first met in college. At first, Dawn's friends were confused by her interest in Nick, whose personality was the complete opposite of hers. Over time, they noticed a significant change in Dawn's behavior. Normally, she was confident, outgoing, independent, motivated, and always striving to achieve new goals. However, when she was with Nick, her personality changed dramatically. She became shy, introverted, and indecisive, often putting Nick's interests above her own, even when they made her feel uncomfortable. It seemed that Nick's influence brought out the worst in her, rather than the best. Despite this, their love continued to grow and their relationship remained strong. In 1990, Nick proposed to Dawn on Alki Beach and they became engaged. They married on April 20, 1991, and then moved back to Bremerton. By this time, both Dawn and Nick had completed their education. Dawn began working as a loan officer, and Nick began his work as a youth pastor at Christ Community Church on Bainbridge Island, near Seattle. Nick had a desire to become a youth pastor, specifically targeting Christ Community Church due to his relationship with his former youth pastor, Bob, also known as P.B. Smith. At the time, P.B. Smith remained at the church, having overseen the church's affairs since the late 1980s, but now partnered with Pastor Robert Billy Craig to lead the congregation. P.B. Smith took a more friendly but conservative approach to church leadership, while Pastor Robert was known for his strict teachings. In their marriage, Nick made decisions without his wife Dawn, largely because they adhered to the principles of Christian fundamentalism. These principles dictate that the wife submit to the authority of her husband, which Nick and Dawn believed was in line with God's plan. At Christ Community Church, this ideology was clearly promoted and considered acceptable. The church even performed exorcisms for its members, encouraged large families as a divine mandate, and advocated homeschooling for children. Modesty in women was emphasized and questions about sexuality were taboo. Those who disagreed with these norms risked expulsion from the church, creating a climate of silence among dissenters for fear of expulsion. Dawn and her congregation are mired in what many call a cult, with her husband, Nick, playing a key role in these dangerous activities. Initially, Nick admires P.B. Smith, but he soon becomes dissatisfied with P.B. Smith's laid-back approach and feels he has not learned enough. He turns his admiration to Pastor Robert, who has a more extreme and strict approach. Nick seeks direct advice from Robert, distancing himself from his close relationship with P.B. Smith. In contrast, Pastor Robert sees Nick as an opportunity to advance his own agenda. He wants to remove P.B. Smith from his position as senior pastor and take control of the church. Robert's intentions are not sincere and he uses Nick to achieve his own goals. Meanwhile, Nick and his wife Dawn are facing challenges in their personal lives. They are constantly moving from house to house, renovating properties to sell. Dawn grew tired of this lifestyle and longed to settle down in a permanent home. By 1997, these issues were causing tension in their relationship. Nick found a house in need of repair in East Bremerton, planning to move in, renovate, and make it their home. However, the purchase, renovation, and home business plunged the couple into debt. Although their relationship seemed perfect, with Dawn seemingly a supportive wife who agreed with Nick's plans, there were underlying issues that were not immediately apparent. At the same time, Nick was getting into more debt by frequently lending money to people in their church. Nick embarked on his ambitious project of establishing a Christian youth camp. Despite financial difficulties, his passion for the project kept him going. He searched for the perfect location in Jefferson County, confident that he would find the ideal location. His determination intensified when a congregant, a woman named Sandy Glass, asserted receiving a divine vision affirming that the property Nick had his eye on was destined to become the site of the youth camp he envisioned. Sandy Glass, then in her early 20s, had faced hardships in her life. She had lost her first boyfriend to illness and her father in a construction accident. Her brother was addicted to drugs. Sandy was married to Jimmy, a carpenter, and they were struggling financially. A stay-at-home mother, Sandy depended on Jimmy's income, but her tendency to overspend often led to arguments between them. These disagreements sometimes caused Jimmy to scream or retreat, spending hours at the bar venting his frustrations. To resolve their marital problems, the couple sought help from the church and began attending marriage counseling sessions led by Nick, who had been the church's marriage counselor for many years. However, many parishioners filed complaints with Robert about Nick's counseling style, feeling uncomfortable with the way he prioritized intimate and often sexual topics over other important issues. Because of their trust in P.B. Smith, who was still affiliated with the church, members felt that Nick would not have been entrusted with the role if he were not trustworthy. However, in the fall of 1997, Pastor Robert took over as senior pastor, a move that was fully supported by the church council, replacing P.B. Smith. P.B. Smith and his wife then left to do missionary work in Africa. Jimmy's parents, who were also churchgoers, considered Sandy and Jimmy's decision to seek church intervention to be a hasty one. They even questioned Nick's qualifications and experience in guiding their son's marriage. Their concerns grew when they noticed that Nick focused a lot of his attention on Sandy, rather than Sandy and Jimmy as a couple. This attention was not limited to counseling sessions. Nick and Sandy spent a lot of time talking on the phone and meeting outside of church. Jimmy's parents felt that the relationship between Nick and Sandy was unacceptable. They spent a lot of time together and seemed closer than a normal counselor and client should be. Pastor Robert's wife, Pamela, also noticed Nick's behavior and spoke to him privately about it. She told him that he needed to focus on his marriage and that his actions were inappropriate. After much complaining, Pastor Robert stepped in and told Sandy that her relationship with Nick was not working and needed to end. Sandy was angry with Pastor Robert's advice because she believed that she and Nick had a special relationship with God. She wrote him a letter saying that his judgment made it difficult for her to think that he believed in her ability to listen to God and help others. The relationship between Sandy and Nick had a negative impact on those around them. Dawn and Jimmy, as well as Jimmy's children from his previous marriage to Sandy, felt hurt and betrayed. One of the children even told Jimmy that Nick and Sandy had discussed Nick becoming their new father after Jimmy's death. Dawn began sharing with friends at church about her financial difficulties and her desire to have children, a desire that Nick strongly opposed. As 1997 drew to a close, Nick had relationships with several women in addition to Sandy. He engaged in private conversations and lengthy phone calls with these women. At the same time, Sandy's alleged visions grew stronger, prompting Nick to prioritize the establishment of her youth camp and devote more time to their relationship, as she believed they were destined to be together. On the contrary, Dawn made a lot of effort to rekindle Nick's happiness with her, even trying to lose weight. Some of the women in the congregation supported her, telling her that the problems in their relationship were not her fault, but Nick's own. Unfortunately, Dawn's life with Nick did not turn out as she had hoped when they got married. When Christmas came, Dawn woke up feeling unwell with a cold. Despite being sick, she and Nick spent the day with their family. That evening, they visited P.B. Smith's house and spent time with his family. Nick had plans to go hunting with Lindsay, P.B. Smith's daughter, and her friends the next morning, the 26th. Nick met his friends at the Hood Canal Bridge in Jefferson County to go hunting just before dawn. They spent a few hours in the woods without shooting anything and decided to leave. Around 9 a.m., they went to a local diner for breakfast. While eating, Nick suddenly stood up, looking worried, and said, "Dawn and I haven't opened our Christmas presents yet." He left the diner at 9:30 a.m. and arrived home at 10 a.m. to find his wife dead in a fire. When police arrived on the scene, they discovered that the fire had initially started in the bedroom, due to a malfunctioning space heater. The fire quickly spread due to newspapers and wrapping paper in the room, and was made worse by multiple propane tanks on the floor. Nick told friends at the diner that he and his family had not opened their Christmas presents. But he told police a different story. According to Nick, they had actually opened their presents the night before. He said that Dawn had gone to bed feeling unwell and left the wrapping paper scattered around. Nick also confirmed that he had received a propane tank as a Christmas present. The couple was in the process of renovating their home and had used the heater to stay warm during the winter. However, these old fireplaces were not as safe as modern ones and often caused fires and deaths. The police found no inconsistencies in Nick's story. As a local pastor, Nick's status in the community gave the police no reason to suspect anything else. And his wife's death, which was ruled an accident. The congregation was concerned for Nick's health and wanted to support him during this difficult time. Pastor Robert even offered to try to revive Dawn through prayer, but Nick refused, saying he did not want her to suffer any potential pain. This refusal surprised Robert, as Nick had previously been willing to participate in church activities, including the exorcisms they had performed. Mary Glass, Sandy's mother-in-law, immediately suspected Nick of being involved in Dawn's death. Convinced that it was no accident, she urged her husband to report the situation to the police, but this never happened. Soon after, the police officially declared Dawn's death an accident and referred the case to Nick's insurance company. Nick began the process of collecting on Dawn's life insurance, which raised some suspicions from family and friends. They thought it was unusual for Nick to settle the insurance so quickly after Dawn's death, but they understood that the couple had significant debt and that Nick needed the money to pursue his plans for the youth camp. Some church members found Nick's way of grieving unusual, but they refrained from expressing concern, believing that everyone deals with grief differently. The church community came together to remember Dawn's life at her funeral. Family and friends shared stories and remembered her life. Although everyone was sad, Nick remained calm throughout and even gave a 45-minute speech in Dawn's honor. When friends helped him clean out his house, they found several photos of Dawn hidden in the back of a closet, making it seem as though he wanted to throw them away. After that, Nick's behavior became increasingly harsh and insensitive, not only toward some church members but also toward neighbors and friends. He had many romantic relationships with women in the congregation. In a shocking turn of events, Nick began an intimate relationship with Diana, Dawn's mother, under the guise of grief over his widowhood. His actions became too much for Pastor Robert to bear, and Nick was asked to leave Christ Community Church. This eviction had a significant impact on Nick, marking the beginning of his growing troubles. On April 10, 2001, Sandy and her attorney met with the district attorney. The district attorney offered Sandy immunity in exchange for her testimony about a secret she had kept since December 26, 1997. According to Sandy, on the morning of Dawn's death, Nick called her and said, "I did it." However, their conversation was abruptly interrupted by another incoming call on Sandy's phone, leaving Nick waiting to answer the call from someone at the church who had informed him of Dawn's case. After the second call ended, Sandy returned to the conversation with Nick and asked him to clarify what he meant. Nick simply repeated, "It's over, it's over." Sandy did not ask for further details about the call for several weeks. Eventually, Sandy confronted Nick, who confessed to giving Dawn an overdose of Benadryl and then suffocating her by placing a plastic bag over her face. Tragically, Dawn was still partially conscious and aware of what her husband was doing as she suffocated. After she died, Nick carefully placed old newspapers and wrapping paper around the room, including under her body, and placed propane tanks near the bed. He then turned on the heater to burn and start the fire, in an attempt to destroy any evidence of the crime and make it look like an accident. Dawn's autopsy revealed no soot or carbon monoxide in her lungs or blood. The pathologist who examined Dawn ruled her death an accidental fire. They missed crucial evidence of carbon monoxide binding to red blood cells, suggesting that she had not been breathing during the fire. Despite having 5 times the normal amount of Benadryl in her system, the pathologist concluded that the amount was not enough to cause respiratory failure, arguing that even if Dawn had been drowsy, she would have reacted to the increased temperature. Notably, crime scene photos showed newspapers under Dawn's body, a disturbing detail that was largely overlooked. A fire marshal became suspicious and spoke to the police, but he had no authority to decide whether Dawn's death was accidental. Nick was arrested on September 12, 2001, in the Kinko's parking lot. He adamantly denied any involvement in Dawn's death and claimed the church was trying to frame him. Despite his claims that church members could cause serious harm, Nick was charged with first-degree murder and his bail was set at $750,000. Sandy's account, when relayed to the police, added to the frustration over the nearly 4-year delay in considering Nick a suspect or making an arrest. And her reason for cooperating, stemming from anger over Nick's relationships with other women in the church. Church members reported Nick's strange behavior and inappropriate relationships when questioned. They were also upset that he did not buy a tombstone for Dawn after receiving the life insurance payout. On September 17, 2001, Nick pleaded not guilty in court. He claimed that the church had cursed him and that Pastor Robert had a dark influence beyond the understanding of the police. When Nick's trial began, Nick Hatcheny was charged with aggravated first-degree murder, which carries a sentence of life in prison without parole. Witnesses, including women who were involved with Nick and church members who had been counseled by him, shared their testimonies with the jury. These testimonies showed the major impact the church had on their lives, including experiences of visions and messages supposedly from God. Nick used these to control and manipulate them. P.B. Smith's daughter also testified, sharing how she met Nick through her father when she was a teenager. Nick seduced her, and they had sex after Dawn's death. This continued until she moved away about a year later. Doctors and forensic experts also testified, emphasizing that Dawn's body held important clues regarding her death. However, these indicators were ignored, as mentioned earlier, because Nick was a pastor. However, on December 26, 2002, 5 years after Dawn's tragic death, the jury deliberated for a day before returning a guilty verdict on first-degree murder against Nick Hatcheny. At his sentencing hearing on February 7, 2003, Nick addressed the court, which was filled with Dawn's loved ones. He continued to maintain his innocence, but also expressed remorse for his actions and sadness for his family's loss, saying that Dawn deserved better treatment. He was sentenced to life in prison. However, in 2007, an appeal to the state Supreme Court resulted in his life sentence being modified. The appeal argued that, because Dawn died as a result of Nick strangling her, the original charge of aggravated first-degree murder in connection with her death by arson did not match her actual cause of death. The defense argued that Nick therefore did not deserve a life sentence. Ultimately, the state Supreme Court ruled in favor of the appeal, changing Nick's sentence to 26 years in prison. While in prison, Nick was involved in many positive initiatives. He co-founded the Environmental Progress Reentry Network and introduced a waste management system that used vermicompost. Nick could be released from prison soon, as he is eligible for parole in 2025. Sadly, Dawn's life took a tragic turn. She thought she had found the right person, but the reality was very different. This led to a devastating betrayal and her heartbreaking death. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Michael Redlich. Danielle Redlich, born in Florida in 1976, Danielle's family moved to Cleveland, Ohio when she was a child. Her childhood was unremarkable, as she grew up to be a kind, polite, and creative person. As the eldest child, Danielle developed an appreciation for beauty and pursued higher education. She attended Valencia College, earning an Associate of Arts degree, before continuing her studies in psychology at Baldwin Wallace University. In 1996, Danielle's mother, Caitlin Aquino, remarried. However, the marriage was short-lived, lasting only 2 years. Caitlin later passed away from cancer. It turned out that she had been battling breast cancer for a long time. Before the marriage, Caitlin did not have health insurance, so she married her partner primarily to get comprehensive coverage for her medical treatment. Even with high-quality care, the cancer treatment was not successful. After Caitlin passed away, her husband, Michael Redlich, became a single father of the children and, struggling to care for them alone, sought help from Caitlin's eldest child, Danielle. Danielle was now 22 years old and, after the death of her mother, Caitlin, Danielle gave up her independent life and moved into a single household with her younger brother, younger sister, and stepfather, Michael Redlick. Danielle moved in with her stepfather and helped care for the younger siblings and worked part-time at night. During their time together, Danielle and Michael fell in love and eventually married. While Michael pursued a professional sports career, specifically recruiting players. As they spent more time together, Michael became closer to his children and felt comfortable with Danielle. In return, Danielle saw him as a reliable source of support. Danielle and Michael later became husband and wife. Despite their 20-year age difference, they interacted comfortably, not minding the age gap or social status. Over time, their relationship deepened and they gradually became closer. However, Danielle was initially hesitant to share their relationship with her family, choosing to keep it a secret for a while. Michael's life took a significant turn for the better with Danielle. Both felt rejuvenated, he was full of energy, and she was loved and protected. Thanks to his connections, Michael was able to secure her a job at an advertising agency. It paid well and everything went smoothly for the couple. However, an opportunity soon came up for Michael, who was offered the position of vice president of sales for the Memphis Grizzlies basketball team. The problem was that this job required moving to another state. He did not hesitate to ask Danielle to come with him, but she hesitated. With her studies and comfortable lifestyle, she did not want to change her life. Although she initially refused to move, their relationship remained strong and the couple continued to see each other despite the distance. Michael showed Danielle the house he had bought for them in a picturesque area along the Mississippi River. The quiet and cozy neighborhood immediately caught her attention. Danielle decides to move in with Michael and he helps her find a job in radio. Their life starts off seemingly smoothly, but troubling problems begin to arise when Michael's job changes. Michael's stressful work situation. His new position comes with increased responsibilities and pressure, as well as tension with management. As a result, Michael feels overwhelmed, stressed, and exhausted. Michael often turns to alcohol as a way to relieve stress, but this gradually becomes a daily habit. As a result, he often stays up late, comes home drunk and irritable, which puts a significant strain on the family atmosphere. Danielle tries to be supportive and understanding of her husband's difficulties, and initially, after calm conversations with her, Michael seems to calm down and promises to quit drinking. However, these promises are short-lived. Tensions escalated when Michael failed to show up for the dinner they had planned together. Not the first time this had happened, but this time they had specifically arranged to spend the evening together. Danielle was upset and said that if he couldn't make time for her, he should have warned her so she could make other plans. As she walked towards the door, she made an ill-timed joke that unintentionally upset Michael. In a shocked reaction, he slapped her across the face, causing her to stumble backwards. The slap was so hard that she became disoriented and bled. When she noticed the blood splattered on her clothes and the floor, she was so shocked that she backed away from her husband. Michael immediately apologized and began to cry. Faced with the serious injuries his wife suffered, he quickly sought help by taking her to a trusted sports doctor. The doctor examined her and gave her first aid. The doctor noticed that her front tooth was chipped and recommended that she see a dentist for further examination due to the severity of the injury. After the argument, Michael made amends by planning a special and thoughtful dinner. His efforts earned his wife, Danielle, forgiveness, and as a result, she chose not to report the incident. This decision may have been influenced by the state's strict domestic violence laws, as she sympathized with her husband and decided not to cause him any more trouble. However, this was not the first time Michael had displayed disturbing behavior. Danielle had experienced similar incidents with him when they lived in Cleveland. During this time, Michael often became jealous when Danielle's ex-boyfriend visited her. One evening, Michael made some sarcastic comments about her ex-boyfriend while they were driving home, causing Danielle to react in a similar manner. In the heat of the moment, Michael hit Danielle but quickly apologized, claiming that his actions were due to hurt feelings. Danielle chose to forgive Michael, partly blaming herself for what had happened. Over time, the incident was forgotten, as some things that happen in relationships are considered a normal part of life. In 2003, Danielle's family welcomed the birth of their daughter Jaden, marking a memorable milestone in their lives. A year later, they decided to formalize their relationship. Everything was going well, however, Michael faced challenges in his career due to a change in management, which prevented him from getting the promotion he wanted. 7 years later, the family expanded with the birth of a son named Sawyer. The parents were completely focused on raising their children. If it weren't for Michelle's job and the stress it caused, family life would have been perfect. However, Michael's job led to more frequent conflicts and he started drinking again. During an argument, he grabbed Danielle by the neck and pinned her against the wall, scaring her. This time, his wife could not stand the rude behavior, so she packed her things, took the children and moved in with relatives. Michael visited her several times, apologized and asked her to come home. After a while, their relationship was repaired. Danielle's family went through a period of instability. In the following years, her family moved several times. Michael received a job offer in California, where they lived for about 5 years, but this time it was not successful. Michael continued to struggle with personal problems and his excessive drinking. At one point, both he and his wife lost their jobs, forcing them to rely on savings for financial support. In 2014, the family faced another move, this time to Indiana. Although the move was difficult, it brought the promise of a new home and a fresh start. To make the transition smoother, Michael moved to Indiana first, while Danielle and the children remained in California. This temporary separation gave them time to sell their old home and belongings. However, the frequent moves took a toll on the family, especially the children, who had a hard time adjusting to their constantly changing surroundings. The entire process took a year, during which time the family's financial situation improved. But the couple's relationship changed. The distance and infrequent meetings took their toll, and Danielle and Michael became distant and barely communicated. When the couple finally reunited, they faced new problems. Danielle began to suspect Michael of having an affair, his attitude became cold and distant, and the previous affection faded. However, Michael confessed that his age and health were the reasons. He had been embarrassed to mention this before, fearing that he would lose his younger wife. Danielle was moved by Michael's honesty and continued to support him. The couple decided to undergo a course of hormone injections. Testosterone injections rejuvenated Michael physically and mentally. He seemed younger, regaining his former energy and vitality. However, the treatment also made him more aggressive. One evening, after watching a movie together, Michael fell asleep and Danielle went upstairs to rest. The next morning, Michael woke up, went into the bathroom where Danielle was brushing her teeth, and hit her on the head. His excuse for the outburst was that Danielle had not woken him up the night before. After the fight, she told him that she was fed up with his actions and was leaving. This angered Michael, who became violent and strangled her. Danielle was unable to defend herself and began to lose consciousness. At one point, she felt like she was going to die. After a while, Danielle regained consciousness and found her husband standing over her. He was scared and confused, begging for forgiveness. Danielle could only crawl away silently. After the incident, they continued to live together and raise their children together, but from then on, their relationship changed completely. It was clear that the time had come for them to go back. The man began to drink more and more, and tensions in the family increased, with arguments breaking out even over the smallest things. Michael's frustration increasingly turned into physical aggression, but Danielle stayed with him, although she was unhappy and increasingly resentful of her husband. She still loved him deeply, which made her reluctant to leave. The ongoing situation had a profound impact on Danielle. She became increasingly anxious and irritable, leading her to withdraw from social interactions. To distract herself, she turned to photography as a hobby. By the end of 2014, Danielle's family had finally settled into their life in Florida. Michael, exhausted by the stress of his previous job, decided to change careers. He accepted a position as Director of External and Cooperative Programs at the University of Central Florida and began teaching. Although his income was lower than what he had earned in the NBA, the job provided him with joy and stability. Initially, the family rented a house, but after a year they eventually bought their own home in the Winter Park area. Their new home was a Mediterranean-style estate with ample space. Danielle loved the attic, where she often retreated. She often slept there overnight, especially when Michael was in a rage. Michael's testosterone injections had a positive impact on his personal life with Danielle. But his behavior during these intimate moments was still harsh. Their relationship continued to be strained. As a result, Danielle turned to alcohol for comfort. While Michael worked to support the family financially, Danielle took care of the home and children. However, her increasing isolation and the couple's constant arguments eventually led to their separation in 2016. Despite their separation, Michael remained in touch with the children and continued to provide financial support. Danielle found a new job at a school and began to rebuild her life, developing friendships and regaining her independence. Meanwhile, she remained in contact with Michael, allowing him to visit the family home whenever he wanted. Unfortunately, during one of these visits, a violent argument broke out, leaving Danielle hospitalized with brain damage. Fearing the consequences for Michael, she chose not to reveal the truth about the incident. Michael mistook Danielle's silence for acceptance, but it was just a cover. In early October 2016, Michael attempted to run her over with his car, and her life was only saved because she jumped into the bushes at the right time. This prompted Danielle to file a police report, but when the police began to demand more details, she recanted her statement and left the station. The couple later reconciled and moved in together, a decision that ultimately proved fateful for both of them. At approximately 9 a.m. on January 12, 2019, Danielle called 911, reporting that her husband, Michael, had suffered a heart attack and needed assistance. When emergency crews arrived at the scene, they immediately smelled a strong chemical odor coming from the living room. A bucket of pink liquid was also found near the scene. However, the rescue team soon discovered that Michael Redlick had not died of a heart attack as his wife had suggested. Instead, they found him lying on the floor in a pool of blood, the victim of a fatal stab wound. Danielle Redlick was also found at the scene, with a cut to her wrist. Paramedics treated her before taking her to hospital for further care. As police began to examine the scene, they were certain that Michael Redlick was dead. There was no way he could have inflicted such a fatal wound on himself. Forensic analysis later confirmed that the blood found in the home was Michael's. Although someone had attempted to clean it up, the effort was not thorough. Police still found blood stains in the corners of the room and on the walls, indicating that the body had been moved from the bedroom to the living room. In addition, they discovered a large knife near the kitchen entrance and 3 smaller knives in the sink, indicating that the cleanup attempt was unsuccessful. Danielle was questioned by police shortly after a doctor confirmed that her injuries were not life-threatening. During the interview, her statements were inconsistent and contradictory. At first, she said that she thought her husband, Michael, had died of heart disease. She later changed her story, claiming that he had committed suicide after a heated argument. However, forensic experts disputed her claim, pointing out that the nature of the injuries made it unlikely that a person would have inflicted the injuries on themselves. Usually, people who try to end their lives choose a simpler and less painful method. The autopsy results showed that Michael died from excessive blood loss, and if he had received timely medical assistance, his life could have been saved. In addition, he suffered a laceration to his left eye, and toxicology tests also showed a high alcohol concentration in his body. A few days before the incident, Michael and his wife Danielle had a heated argument at home, which was witnessed by their eldest daughter Jaden. During the argument, Michael, who had been drinking, barged into the bathroom where Danielle was hiding. Jaden intervened and took the bottle of wine from her father. Danielle then left the house and only returned after Michael had fallen asleep. Although this was the first time Jaden had seen his father so angry, he later apologized for his behavior many times. Despite the incident, Jaden described his father as a loving and caring person. However, she believes that her mother often instigated conflicts that led to such arguments. The next day, Michael and his wife tried to make up, and he invited her and the children to watch a football game. Although they spent time together, Danielle seemed sad and uncommunicative. After taking the children to a friend's house for a sleepover, the couple returned home alone. That evening, Danielle went to McDonald's and returned home around 10:30 p.m. When she entered the house, she found Michael drunk. While they were having dinner, Danielle received a sudden text message from a strange man. When Michael saw this, he became aggressive, bit into a hamburger and spat at her. He then attacked Danielle, trying to strangle her. In self-defense, Danielle quickly grabbed a nearby knife and stabbed Michael in the chest. He fell to the ground and began to bleed profusely. Danielle claimed that after the incident, she called the emergency services but got the wrong number. This was later confirmed during the investigation. She said that she was so shocked that she lay down next to Michael and slept until morning. Danielle admitted that she lied during the emergency call and subsequent questioning, citing fear as her motive. Specifically, she feared that her claim of self-defense would not be believed. Her concerns were not unfounded, given her recent history. Shortly before the incident, she had been involved in a fight with friends. When police arrived at the scene, she resisted, attempting to bite one of them. She also refused to cooperate with the investigation, resulting in charges of disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. Danielle was placed on probation for approximately 1 year. An investigation revealed that the cuts on Danielle's wrists were self-inflicted due to emotional turmoil, but the injuries were superficial and not life-threatening. Therefore, her words were not to be believed. Upon further investigation, the police discovered that after learning about Michael's affair, she registered on a dating website where she socialized with men and retaliated by being unfaithful. Her profile status stated that she was single and not in a relationship. Analysis of numerous messages between Michael and Danielle showed that she still loved her husband. When she learned about his affair, she felt betrayed. Danielle discovered that her husband, Michael, had intended to leave her, despite his constant expressions of remorse and desire to mend their relationship. This fact made it difficult for her to understand and accept his actions. Danielle shared that she felt heartbroken, believing that she had wasted the best years of her life on someone who did not value her. The prosecution used this information to argue that the crime was premeditated, motivated by a desire for revenge for her husband's infidelity and impending divorce. According to Danielle's neighbors, she was prone to fits of rage, and their arguments often escalated into physical fights. Michael and Danielle were viewed differently by those who knew them. Michael was described as kind and helpful, while Danielle was seen as argumentative. Evidence presented in the case showed that Danielle, acting irrationally and attacking her husband. Danielle's attorney argued that her actions were in self-defense and that she had a history of emotional and physical abuse. Relatives who often witnessed their arguments confirmed that Michael was rude and that he often mistreated and humiliated her, although he never did so in front of them. Several family members reported that Danielle was anxious and had a bad temper, which only emerged after many years of marriage. The prosecution focused on the fact that Danielle left her husband to die, possibly out of hatred and resentment towards Michael. In addition, the prosecution emphasized that Danielle would lose a significant portion of their accumulated wealth if they divorced. Furthermore, the prosecution pointed to inconsistencies in Danielle's testimony, suggesting that she was attempting to confuse the investigation and possibly tamper with evidence. Danielle was offered a plea deal during the investigation to admit to manslaughter, which would have resulted in only 10 years in prison. Despite the offer, she declined, choosing instead to maintain her innocence, although she faced life in prison if convicted of first or second-degree murder. Trial takes place on July 17, 2022. The jury returned a verdict, finding Danielle Redlich not guilty of premeditated murder, as they believed her actions were in self-defense. However, they found her guilty of tampering with evidence, which resulted in her receiving a 5-year suspended sentence. On August 5, 2022, the day the verdict was announced, Danielle Redlich was released from court. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Christy Schoen. Christy Schoen was born on September 3, 1976, in Madrid, Spain, to American parents who served in the United States military. Due to her father's military career, Christy spent her childhood moving between different locations in Europe. Her family eventually settled back in the United States. Christy began school in New Orleans, Louisiana, but her education was moved around frequently due to her father's military career. She briefly attended schools in Texas and Illinois before moving to Latin America, where she lived for several years. Such a nomadic lifestyle had its benefits, as Christy spoke multiple languages from a young age and had the opportunity to experience the cultures and traditions of other countries. However, during her teenage years, she faced challenges integrating into new groups and making friends in new places. This constant change helped her develop exceptional communication skills. As a result, she easily made friends with people from different backgrounds and gained a reputation as a kind, outgoing, and charming young woman. Christy was also an active and healthy person, participating in various sports from a young age, such as gymnastics, swimming, and kickboxing. After graduating, her family eventually settled in Beloit, Mississippi, where her father had retired from the military. This stability helped Christy form lasting friendships and discover new interests, especially cooking. Christy discovered a passion for cooking and spent a lot of time experimenting in the kitchen, creating dishes that were praised by everyone. Her passion for cooking motivated her to pursue further training, and she completed culinary courses to hone her skills. Christy's parents initially envisioned her becoming a professional chef, but she surprised them by showing a natural talent for acting. With a strong passion for the arts, she enrolled in an acting academy and moved to Los Angeles to pursue her dream. Upon arriving in Los Angeles, Christy discovered the many opportunities that were waiting for her. She used her intelligence and determination to establish herself in the industry. Her early experiences included appearing in commercials, performing on stage, and working as an extra or stunt double in major Hollywood productions. One of her first notable roles was a small role in the Terminator series, which required her to perform physically demanding stunts. Despite graduating from the Acting Academy in 2000, Christy has yet to secure any major or memorable roles. Despite her striking looks and obvious talent, she later decided to focus on her cooking and athletic skills. Christy gained widespread recognition after appearing on several popular culinary television shows. Her appearance on the next Food Network Star placed her in the finals, but unfortunately, she did not win due to mixed reviews from the judges for her unique dishes. Despite this, Christy gained attention and built a significant following on social media, where thousands of people follow her life and culinary creations. She actively promotes healthy living, giving advice on proper nutrition and even developing her own exercise routines to maintain good fitness. About a year later, Christy launched a catering company that caters to events and sells prepared food products. What sets her business apart is her focus on healthy eating, with menus featuring her own unique recipes. Christy soon considered taking her business to the next level by starting a farm that grew healthy, sustainable produce. This would allow her to expand her catering services and continue her commitment to healthy eating. Additionally, she began teaching online nutrition courses and pursuing other projects in the field. Christy met Joseph Timothy Codd, also known as JT, in 2012 at a studio in Los Angeles. Joseph was a casting director working on a popular cooking show that Christy wanted to be on. They connected immediately. At the time, Joseph was nearly 7 years older than Christy, had been married before, and was in the process of getting divorced. He was captivated by the attractive blonde's beauty and charisma, and he began pursuing her romantically. Christy returned his interest, and they soon began a relationship. As their relationship grew, Joseph shared and supported his partner's ideas, and together they began working on their own farm project. Soon after, the couple decided to leave Los Angeles and move from Sun, California to North Carolina. To fund their new venture, they sold Christy's catering business, and Joseph sold his Hollywood home, using the proceeds to buy a large lot in Lear. Their new property included a spacious home and nearly an acre of land to make their dream a reality. Joseph continued his work with television channels, but switched to working remotely, while Christy focused on growing her blog about healthy living and nutrition. The couple had a very harmonious and loving relationship. After deciding to take their love to the next level, they got married in August 2014 in a lavish ceremony attended by hundreds of guests, including family members, friends, colleagues, neighbors, and fans. The couple was extremely happy and had big plans for their future. Just 3 months after their wedding, Christy became pregnant, and the couple was overjoyed and happy. During an ultrasound scan after the new year, the doctor confirmed that they were having a baby girl. Shortly after, Christy shared the news with her mother over the phone, mentioning that they had chosen the name Skylar for their child. The pregnancy went smoothly and everything seemed to be falling into place. When Christy was 5 months pregnant, troubling events began to occur. In the days leading up to her disappearance, Christy had been keeping her distant parents updated on her well-being through frequent phone calls, sometimes as long as an hour. However, on March 13, 2015, Christy's mother was unable to reach her daughter, but she initially didn't think much of it. The next day, Christy's mother tried to contact her and her husband, Joseph, again, but her calls went unanswered. Her attempts to reach her son-in-law were also unsuccessful. When both phones were turned off on March 15, Christy's mother became increasingly concerned. Since Christy and Joseph's families lived far away, they could not easily verify that everything was okay at their children's home. Therefore, Christy's mother decided to contact Cecily, a trusted friend of her daughter who lived in the area, to have her check the house. When she arrived at Christy's house, the friend noticed that both husband and wife's cars were parked outside, but the front door was locked. Despite knocking and shouting, there was no response. This, combined with the couple's phone being unreachable for 3 days, raised significant suspicion. Cecily saw the couple's dogs locked inside the house through a window, which was unusual as they never left them alone. Cecily walked around the house and discovered that the back door lock had been broken, indicating a possible break-in. She immediately called Christy's mother, who then contacted the police. Upon arrival, footage confirmed that the back door had been broken into and found a disturbance inside indicating someone had been searching for something. Several valuables had been stolen, including a jewelry box belonging to the homeowner and items from a safe that had been broken into in the couple's bedroom. However, there were no signs of a struggle or evidence that the couple had been held or taken by force. The perpetrators had acted very discreetly, leaving no fingerprints or DNA. While relatives held out hope that Joseph, 45, and his wife, Christy, 38, who was 8 months pregnant, were still alive, seasoned police officers were more pessimistic. In the early days of the investigation, police were unable to find any significant evidence or clues. The missing couple, Christy and Joseph, had no enemies or conflicts with anyone else, making it a challenge to reconstruct what happened. The only clue they found was the couple's phones, which had been left at home and last used on March 12. Although the devices ran out of battery the next day, they still had records of incoming calls. Police decided to interview the couple's neighbors to see if anyone had noticed anything unusual recently. That's when an interesting detail emerged. A neighbor who lived across the street reported seeing another local resident, later identified as Robert Jason Owens, 36, throw a large bundle into a dumpster near the couple's home on the morning of March 15. The neighbor initially thought little of it, but after learning about the couple's disappearance, he decided to share the information with the police. However, by the time the police received the information, the trash had already been taken to the landfill. Before searching the landfill, the police wanted to speak with Robert. After investigating the information, the police learned that he lived in the same neighborhood, knew the couple, and was even considered a close friend of the family. Robert was a handyman who had helped Christy and Joseph when they first moved into their new home. At first, there was nothing suspicious about Robert's relationship with the couple. However, upon further investigation, other locals described Robert as a strange and unpredictable person, raising suspicions about his possible involvement in the couple's disappearance. Robert was called to the police station on March 16 for questioning about the missing couple. Initially, he denied any involvement in the couple's disappearance and claimed to know nothing about the bundle in question. Since he did not confess to anything and there was no solid evidence, there was not enough to charge him. Things changed that evening when police found a large bundle of belongings in a landfill. Inside were items from the missing couple's home. Police also found Robert's fingerprints and DNA on some of the couple's partially burned clothing. A blood-stained blanket and bedsheets from their home were also found in the bundle. This evidence confirmed police suspicions that Christy and Joseph were no longer alive. Those suspicions were dispelled when police searched Robert's home and found charred human remains in his wood stove. This discovery led to Robert being named a suspect in Christy and Joseph's deaths. Despite Robert's initial denials and inconsistent statements, he eventually confessed to the crime after hours of questioning. However, he claimed that the incident was accidental. According to Robert, on the evening of March 12, he visited Christy and Joseph's home after getting stuck in the mud while trying to avoid hitting a dog with his car. He asked them to help push the car out, and Christy and Joseph agreed. While they were pushing the car, Robert claimed that he accidentally pressed the gas pedal instead of the brake pedal, causing the car to hit and run over the couple. Terrified by what he had done, Robert chose not to report the incident to the police, fearing that he would be charged with intentionally taking their lives. Instead, he attempted to cover up the crime. Robert claimed that he returned to Christy's home through the back door and took a blanket from the bedroom. Using these blankets, he wrapped the bodies of his victims, whom he was not sure were actually dead, and placed them in the back of his pickup truck. He then drove the bodies back to his home, where he dismembered them with a saw and a hatchet in the bathroom. To dispose of the remains, Robert burned the body parts piece by piece on his stove. However, instead of burning the victims' blood-soaked clothing and personal belongings, he packed them into a garbage bag and threw them in the trash, assuming they would end up in a landfill and never be found. After disposing of the bodies, Robert broke into Christy's home himself, stealing money and valuables to create the appearance of a burglary. Robert's brutal treatment of the victims' bodies, as well as his unsettling calmness in describing the incident, shocked even experienced police officers. Police discovered a saw and an axe at his home, both covered in blood, skin, and bone fragments from the deceased. What was particularly shocking was that Robert made no attempt to clean or conceal the tools of his crime, believing that he had nothing to do with the crime scene, having avoided leaving any evidence at the victim's home. A forensic analysis confirmed that bone fragments discovered in Robert's kitchen matched the DNA of the missing couple, prompting law enforcement to investigate further into the suspect's past. Robert Owens, a loner, was unmarried and had no children. He also kept his distance from his relatives. In 2000, Robert moved out of his previous home in Asheville, North Carolina, to settle on a newly purchased lot in Lewiston, where he later built a house. As police investigated further, they found a connection between Robert and an unsolved crime that had occurred 15 years earlier in Asheville. The case involved the unexplained disappearance of Zeb Wayne Quinn, an 18-year-old man who had been Robert's childhood friend. At the time of his disappearance, Zeb was a military trainee and a part-time employee at Walmart, living near Robert. On January 2, 2000, Zeb met Robert after his shift ended, and they planned to drive to Lewiston to buy a new car. However, Zeb never returned home. A few days later, his Mazda protege was discovered in another part of town, parked with the headlights on. A heart was drawn on the window in red lipstick. Although the car was recovered, Zeb was never found, and the car was also damaged and scratched with paint marks from another car. The last person to see Zeb was Robert, and his car also showed signs of damage. Notably, the scratches on Robert's car contained paint particles from Zeb's car. Robert told a strange and unbelievable story. As soon as they walked towards Lewiston, Zeb blinked at Robert to stop. Zeb said he had received a message on his pager and needed to use a public phone urgently. He asked Robert to wait and drove to the nearest gas station but returned after 10 minutes. Zeb appeared panicked, said their plans had changed, and drove off in an unknown direction, in the process crashing into Robert's car. It was also discovered that Zeb, who was romantically involved with a woman named Misty Taylor, whose ex-boyfriend, Wesley Smith, had threatened Zeb with harm if he did not stop seeing Misty Taylor. Wesley and Robert were questioned in the case, but due to lack of evidence, all three were released. Additionally, Misty and Wesley had alibis, while Robert did not. After investigation, a large sum of money and a pager were missing from Zeb's car. Police suspected the pager might be a false lead, and there was never any evidence that the message was sent. A phone call was made to Walmart the day after Zeb went missing from the Volvo plant where Robert worked, saying that Zeb would be out sick for a few days. However, the voice on the phone sounded strange to Zeb's coworkers. Despite further investigation, no new evidence or witnesses were found, leaving the case unsolved and Zeb listed as missing. 15 years later, Robert was again questioned as a suspect in Zeb's disappearance. The Zeb Wayne Quinn case was reopened in June 2015, but hopes of finding new information were low. When questioned again, Robert repeated the story he told in 2000, without providing any new clues. However, the police decided to conduct a thorough search of his property. The investigation led them to an unexpected discovery: a walled-off cavity inside a detached concrete slab at Robert's home. Inside, they found small, heavily charred human bone fragments, but unfortunately the remains were too damaged for DNA analysis to definitively determine whether they belonged to the missing Zeb. Interviews with a neighbor revealed new information that helped shed some light on the situation. An elderly man who lived nearby recalled a strange incident that occurred in January 2000. At the time, Robert had just purchased the land and was starting to build his house. One evening, Robert lit a fire that emitted a strong odor. The smell was so nauseating that it blew toward the neighbor, making him nearly sick. The neighbor even approached Robert to express his concerns about the smell. Shortly after the incident, the fire pit was filled with concrete, which seemed unusual. Robert mentioned that he had plans to build a small fountain at that location, but he never carried out the plan. The neighbor forgot about the incident until 15 years later, when the police came to the house. Eventually, Robert confessed to participating in a crime and told a new story. According to Robert, his uncle, Walter Owens, was the one who killed Zeb. Walter had been hired by Wesley Smith. Wesley apparently still had feelings for Misty, Zeb's girlfriend, and wanted to get rid of Zeb. Robert claimed that he was unaware of his uncle's plans and was only told to take Zeb to a secluded location. When they reached a wooded area, Robert's uncle ordered them to stop the car and forced Zeb to do so. When Zeb got out of the car, Walter shot and killed him quietly. After the murder, Walter instructed Robert to help him cut up Zeb's body, package it, and then burn it in Robert's yard that night. The body was then encased in concrete. Walter Owens could not be questioned, as he had died several years before Robert's chilling confession. Furthermore, no evidence was found at the crime scene, and Robert's story was not confirmed. Robert initially faced serious charges, including first-degree murder in the deaths of Joseph Timothy Codd and his wife Christy Schoen, fetal homicide, dismemberment, concealment of evidence, burglary, and robbery. These charges could have resulted in the death penalty. However, it was discovered that Robert had a long history of struggling with depression and psychosis, for which he was taking strong medication. His attorney used this information as the basis for his defense. In 2017, Robert Jason Owens accepted a plea deal, admitting to murder in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. As a result, he was convicted of second-degree manslaughter, dismemberment and burning of a body, burglary, and robbery. In total, he was sentenced to 59 years in prison. In 2022, Robert entered into another plea deal with the police, this time in connection with the case of Zeb Wayne Quinn. However, he only admitted to complicity in the murder and assisting in concealing evidence of the crime. He was sentenced to an additional 12 years in prison, on top of his existing 59-year sentence. During his sentencing hearing, Robert addressed the court and begged forgiveness from the victims' families. Despite his earlier admissions, Robert maintained that the killings were accidental rather than intentional. He blamed his mental health and the strong medication he was taking for impairing his judgment. The victims' families were not convinced by his claims of inadvertence. They refused to accept that the killings were accidental and instead believed that Robert had acted deliberately and with selfish motives.